The time is now 9:01 a.m. We will now call this special public meeting of the Board of Trustees of Humble Independent School District to order. Moving to our first item of business, which is closed session. We actually will not be going into closed session at this time. The item is listed on the agenda as recommended by council, just in case the need arises throughout the duration of the meeting to move to closed session. Our first item is public comment. The board encourages comments from citizens of the district or from district employees. Anyone wishing to speak, either as an individual or as a representative of a group, may do so following the procedure outlined on the agenda. The board asks that comments pertain to public education issues and be no longer than 1 minute. Remember that the board may not discuss or act upon any issues that are not posted on our agenda for today's meeting. If an issue mentioned is listed on tonight's agenda, the board will defer to discussion until the appropriate time during the meeting. In addition, the board has adopted complaint policies that are designed to secure, at the lowest administrative level, a prompt and equitable resolution of complaints and concerns. Complaints brought by students or their parents, by employees, and by citizens may be heard in accordance with board policies. Each of these processes provides that if a resolution cannot be achieved administratively, the person may appeal the administrative decision to the board as a properly posted agenda item. Copies of our district policies on public participation in meetings and filing complaints are available on the Humble ISD website. Our first person signed up for public comment is Megan Bass.
Hi, good morning. Since I only have 1 minute, I'll get straight to the point. I do not agree changing policy to allow president position by election of the board rather than by rotation. You violated board policy when you voted to have Martina Lemon-Dixon president for 2 consecutive terms. You never gave justification why Robert Scarfo was denied his term as president. Now you wish to change policy to make it all okay. This new policy opens the door for more abuse by you. I suggest adding disciplinary action to the agenda for those school board members in violation of board policy. This explains why this formal complaint was ignored a few weeks ago by your hearing officer, Corey Rush. But I have it all in writing.
Thank you. Next, we have Audra Deaver.
Good morning. I'm here to speak about board policy BED, public participation, and your 60-second time limit. I am new to this process and here as a parent advocate, but by default, that makes me a child advocate as well in this public forum. There are 3 components to my current situation: time, message, and manners. Because this board controls my time limit of 60 seconds, I am left with my message versus my manners. Nice manners with polite sentence structure are lengthy and lessens the weight of my message. Therefore, I am left conveying an effective message coming off rude, sometimes using strong words with short sentences. Instead, today, I choose direct for the 30 seconds left that I have. And this is direct. Today, you are the oppressor, and I am the oppressed. Because I'm oppressed, doesn't today's public pedagogy teach me I have the moral high ground? Who's the villain here? If none of us is as smart as all of us, oppressed or not, then please stop the oppression and listen to what parents are saying. It's very simple.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Moving on to our next agenda item, amendment of board operating procedures and board policy BDAA local. Mr. Kirchhoffer, do I have a motion?
Again, the administration has no recommended motion on this item. However, the item was tabled at the September 13th board meeting, and I would recommend that the board pick up the original motion that was stated at that board meeting. So the idea is, Madam President, is to pick up the tabled motion. And I had that pulled up. Hold on a second, please.
Okay.
Okay. The original motion from September 13th on this item was made by trustee Robert Sitton. I move that the board approve the updated BDAA local and board operating procedures as presented. The motion was seconded by Ms. Nancy Morrison.
Okay, so we would like to, do I have to make a motion to pick up that item, or can we just move forward with the tabled item?
As the chair, you can pick up the tabled item as the motion was already pending before the board.
Okay.
At that point, open for discussion with the board.
Okay, well, we will pick up the motion item from the September board meeting. And before I call on everyone to see if they have any comments or discussion, I just want to say at the September board meeting, from my perspective, there seemed as if we needed additional time to review the board operating procedures brought forth by the Board and Superintendent Evaluation Committee. The committee met again on Tuesday, October 11th, to discuss and take a second look at the suggested updates. The committee believes it has done its due diligence, and the item is being brought back to the full board today without that committee making any changes to the updates. Is there any discussion? Mr. Scarfo?
Ms. Lamont Dixon, yes. Looking at this, really, I repeat the comments I made at the last meeting. First, why should the president's office be different than other officers? All members are elected equally by the voters. So I just want to know the rationale for distinguishing the president position as elective and the other officer positions are rotation. And as an example, what if a majority doesn't believe the vice president who rotates that position is qualified to serve as president, and the sitting president becomes incapacitated? So that person won't move up. They'll be removed from being president, even though that's their job, is to fulfill the president's role. So what happens in a case like that? And again, why are we making this change now? I think the constituents of the district really need to know what the true motivation is. And then, why a term of 2 years? The way it's set up now, a person can then be elected for a second 2-year term. So that means someone can sit in that office for 4 years. And I don't think that is very fair to other board members who are just equally, in my opinion, qualified to serve in those positions. Rotation and officer selection, officer term limits really have been meant as guardrails so that you keep politics out of this type of thing, and you also can keep cliques at bay. I mean, the process has served the district, very well for a long time. And again, and I'll repeat, no matter what we do this morning, it doesn't change, it doesn't absolve the board for the last 4 months, being in violation of its own policies and procedures. And again, I'll repeat myself, it sets a bad precedent for the district. We're supposed to be leaders of the district. We should set the tone as to what happens. And it just opens up the box to me, in my opinion, that people will say, well, I don't like that policy. It doesn't work for me. I want you to waive it. Or if it's ignored, as we had gotten legal advice from outside counsel, I don't know if it was last meeting or the meeting before, where if a board ignores a policy, that implies that it's waived. I don't agree with that. But again, that just opens us up. So how are we going to respond to staff, to parents, students, when they have an issue with a policy and say, well, you guys do that when it doesn't fit or serve your purposes? So I think you're opening Pandora's box here by what you're doing. But be that as it may be, you have at least 4 people to vote for it, then obviously the changes will pass. And it really doesn't matter what anyone else says or believes. It doesn't matter what constituents feel about the actions. Then, again, you'll do what you want to do, and that's how it'll be. And so that's all I have to say at the moment.
Well, just one point that I would like to make really quickly is it's not me doing what I want to do. It's at the pleasure of the board. The way board service works, and I think you've been here a long time, it's voted on as a body, and then we leave out as one.
I'm sorry, I
So-
wasn't referring to you if it
Okay.
sounded, well, I meant the board. You know,
Okay,
all
I'm
of us,
sorry.
all of
I'm
us.
sorry.
I'm
I just
sorry
had
if
some
it
very
came
direct
across- no, I'm sorry
emails
if it
from
came
you this
across that
week,
way. No,
so I
no.
wasn't sure.
No,
So, but anyway, so another thing that I want to point out, and then I'll call on everyone else. It has been brought to my attention, like, for instance, someone stated online that I voted myself in as president. You know, I walked into that meeting in June, and I believe I sat down, I think I looked at you, Dr. Fagan, and said, yay, this is my last board meeting as president. So, you know, everything that transpired at that point, as far as me continuing as president, was really a complete surprise to me. And what I want to be really clear on is the board today is not trying to fix anything, because the board operating procedures were waived with the 2 public votes at prior board meetings. So this is not about anything that has happened in the past. I believe the committee and the board is simply working to improve our procedures for the future. The board votes in its officers, and I serve in this role at the pleasure of the board. We did have legal counsel explain the law regarding board policy and procedure and our operating procedures at the, October 18th special meeting. Therefore, we are not in violation. And I know, you know, sometimes people may need additional clarification. I do suggest, you know, our community, our teachers, our staff, go back and watch exactly what that attorney said in that August 18th meeting. So it's not my fault if a person who is up next to be president does not get a second by the board or does not get the votes to be board president. I just want to be clear on that, because we have not violated any laws, and what we're doing today really has nothing to do with the past. It has to do with the future. Anybody else have any discussion, comments? Mr. Sitton?
The only just one matter of clarification, it was mentioned about term limits. This revision specifically has term limits. It's 2-year terms, but no officer in any position would serve consecutive terms, so that verbiage has changed from year to term. As far as the other comments, I've said everything I needed to say as to why we're here. There's been lots of public comment about we need to get back to business. We need to do what we do, and that is educate kids. This is the 6th meeting in 4 months that we've discussed this. And at the September meeting, we specifically said, when it was pulled, that we would revisit this at the workshop. So no one should be surprised whatsoever that we're taking this up this morning, because that was said in the public meeting in September. And that's all I have. I'm ready to vote and put this to bed, move on, do what we need to do for our kids.
Mrs. Parker?
So I have stated publicly from the start that I support the rotation as it stands. I think that there should be some language to kind of tweak it. Just really one statement at the end that says, if the motion to elect the slate of officers established by the progression is unsuccessful, officers may be elected by the majority of the board present at the meeting. But I like our existing rotation. It has worked well for many, many years. The people who put it into place spent a lot of time on it. And so I like the 1-year term. I think the 1 year is great. It gives everybody up here a bite at the apple. And the existing language states, all people elected to the board are equally capable of fulfilling leadership roles on the board. And I believe that. I believe that any one of the 7 of us is capable of being president. If we amend the language a little bit to allow for the situation where we had where, a motion was made, it wasn't seconded, it didn't pass, and so the slate was rejected, this language fixes that. I don't like the 2-year limits, because let's just say, for the sake of argument, that we did keep the rotation. In other words, the current president, when you leave, then it will be Ms. Morrison. If she serves for 2 years and then I serve for 2 years, and then Ken serves for 2 years. Marcus would have to win this election in May and another election before he could even have a bite at the apple. So I do not like the 2-year language. I like 1-year language. Like I said, because all people elected to the board are equally capable of fulfilling leadership roles on the board, and that's what I believe.
And I would echo, I do agree everyone is capable. I would say just personally, and I don't know about Mr. Sitton or Mrs. Morrison, when you guys became president for the first time, but I know for me, I had served 5 years. It was my 5th year. So I was here a long time because there is still a learning curve. Yes, we're all capable, but there is still a learning curve. But I do appreciate that. But are you making a motion, I guess is the question, amendment to the motion? To the motion.
Yes, I would like to amend the motion. May I do that?
Yes, absolutely. Ms. Parker, if you would like to make an amendment to the motion, can you please specify what is exactly you're wishing to amend?
I would like to keep the current board operating procedures with language at the last bullet point that states, if the motion to elect the slate of officers established by the progression is unsuccessful, officers may be elected by a majority of the board members present at the meeting.
So the motion would be to keep the existing rotation, but add additional language as a contingency if the rotation slate would to fail.
Correct.
And I apologize, just to clarify, there was some initial discussion way back in May about adding the parliamentarian to the rotation versus keeping it appointed.
Yes,
Was
and
that-
add the parliamentarian to the,
And Ms. Martin, I can help craft that for the minutes after.
Okay.
So, Madam President, I'd be happy to restate, just because I know we were kind of putting that together. So, Ms. Parker, if I'm correct, please, the motion to amend would be to keep the existing rotation, with the exception of the parliamentarian would be added to the rotation, and Ms. Parker did approach me earlier to get some alternative language, so I'd like to read that specifically. If the motion to elect the slate of officers established by the progression is unsuccessful, officers may be elected by a majority of the board members present at the meeting. Is that correct?
that's correct.
And at this point, Madam President, it would be a motion, so a call for a second, and then
Do
open
I have
for
a
discussion.
second to the amendment?
Second.
Okay, all those in favor?
Discussion.
I'm sorry, discussion?
Yeah, I just want to be clear, though, so with this amendment, if it was to pass, we're back to where the procedures were with that added language. And we don't have the 2-year term for an officer.
Mr. Scarfo, we'd have to discuss the BDAA. Right now, the original motion was to combine both into the action item, the board operating procedure and BDAA. At this point, the amendment is just as to the board operating procedures.
Okay, but
The term limits are in the policy. That's why we'd have to discuss that as well.
Okay, but the board operating procedures, the way they're drafted or amended, or proposed, I should say, says no officer shall serve 2 consecutive terms in any one office. But those terms are for 2 years.
I
proposed
apologize,
in the
Mr.
policy.
Scarfo, are you reading from the operating procedures or BDAA?
The operating procedure,
And which page you on?
15.
Okay. Thank you.
It's the third bullet.
Third bullet. My third bullet is the parliamentarian is an appointed position.
Well, I'm looking at the one that says draft on it.
I apologize, Mr. Scarfo. There's probably been about 10 to 15 drafts of these.
Okay, well, I mean, this is the one that I pulled off the agenda.
Okay.
It says, board officers shall serve for a term of 2 years or until a successor is selected. No officer, next one is no officer of the board shall serve 2 consecutive terms in any one office.
I believe that language was part of the committee's recommendation, so the draft language that is subject to the original motion.
Right?
It was not, I believe, in the original.
Okay, but what I'm trying to get to is, so with this amendment, is that language, are we still back to the proposed draft with that
No,
language
sir.
added?
Ms. Parker has made an amendment to go with alternative language that is based on the current board operating procedures, not the proposed draft.
Okay, that's what I wanted to make sure. Okay, so then, so if that was to pass, that we still have the other amendment, the other action item on the table?
Yes, the board would have the option of also taking up BDAA, but in terms of the motions being rather convoluted, my recommendation would be to address the pending amendment that Ms. Parker has put on the floor before making a second amendment.
Okay,
Mr. Sitton?
It's my understanding that with the amended motion, it basically is reverting the procedures back to the way they were with some minor amendments.
Correct.
What we're seeing in front of us is the suggested changes that is on the current proposal.
The original motion.
Yeah, the original
We
motion.
have an amended motion on
So
the table.
this is the original motion, but her amendment would supersede this and go back to the way it was with just some added language. It's not rocket science, so.
Correct, Mr. Sitton.
Okay, all those in favor? All those opposed? No abstentions, motion does not pass.
The amendment to the
amended
motion fails.
Fails.
And at this point, the board is back to the original motion on the table.
Is there any further discussion? Yes,
Yeah,
Mr. Holmes.
so just want to make a real quick point. I don't think when those policies were created several years ago, with complete respect to the team that crafted them, we're now at roughly 50,000 students. This district is growing by leaps and bounds. I've run organizations that border on $120, $150 million in capacity in corporate America, and they wouldn't have put me in charge of that with 1 to 2 years of experience. So I like the new policy because I'm letting you know I wouldn't feel comfortable being president without a few years underneath my belt. And I'm going to take it even a little further. So when we talk about leadership, John Maxwell has a book called The 360-Degree Leader. So whether I'm at the front or the back, I can still be of influence because I'm still here on this board. So I have to be 100% honest, and I've shared this with a few people. I don't care if I'm ever president. The fact that I'm here on this board matters. So whether I'm never parliamentarian, whether I'm never VP, I'm still serving these children, these teachers, the administration, and the greater community. So I'm letting you know I like the new policy because it enables the leadership to get a little more seasoned when we come into that presidential or vice presidential role. There is a lot more at stake. We are a bigger district. And again, I think it serves the community to have leadership in place that has had a few more years seasoned. And I really like what Ms. Parker said, what Mrs. Parker said. You know, I'd have to win. You know, if it was me and we started right now and I'd have to win, well, that's part of what the election cycle is. And I take that into account, right? So I'd have to win 2 more elections to be president, then so be it. That's what it's about. That's what the election process is. There's winners and losers. So I'm okay with that. All right. And that's really all I had to say. I hope that makes sense.
Yes, thank you. Mr. Kirchhoffer?
Thank you. going back a month ago, it was me that stopped the process purposefully because I needed more time to be prepared to read it and go through it. Just based, it's like it was already said, we've talked about this, 4, 5, 6 months. Sure, mistakes were made. We don't live in a perfect world. I'm here like everybody else. I could care less in life about titles. It is about results. It's about what have you done for me lately? I'm here for, I'm a servant heart like everybody else. We're here for, number one, for the kids. And I beat this in the ground all the time, and I'll continue to as long as I sit here. Our greatest assets are our teachers. We're a destination district. We want to bring the best of the best in the country here. If we do that, the kids who sit in front of the teachers more than their own parents, every day we create exceptional people, leaders, doctors, scientists. The bond that went through, the new building for the Mosaic, I go on and on and on. I'm here as a servant. I'm tired of the bickering. I'm tired of the attacks. I'm tired of it all. Let's move on. There's an election next year. The public will vote for who they want to, and who will do the best job up here. And I believe 100% in Ms. Lamont Dixon. And you've been attacked over and over every day. And, it's enough. It's personal attacks are, there's no place for it, but that's the society we live in. Everybody wants to take a shot, and that's fine. It's all about results. And, we're here again. I want to be done with it and move on. Look, the procedures we had before, they're fine. They needed to be tweaked. This is a better set of rules and guidelines to go by. I could care less about what's next. The only thing I care about is my last name's Kirchhofer, and that's it. So, thank you.
Thank you. Yes, Mrs. Parker.
I would like to clarify, I don't care about a title. I'm sick of the bickering as well. I want our focus to be on kids, teachers. Let's stop it and get back to business. Get back to business. The reason I made my motion was I support the will of the voter, but my motion failed, and so I will support 100% when we walk out of this meeting, the decision of this board. I will 100% support you guys. Whatever, obviously my motion failed, whatever the majority decides, that's what happens, and I support it.
Thank you. Yes, Mr. Scarfo.
Just a couple comments. Mr. Holmes, the rotation allows that experience to build, because normally, unless board members resign because they move away or whatever the case might be, take another office somewhere else, and we had some of that happen, you would have to get reelected to ever rotate up to be president, even in a 4-year term, right? So you would have plenty of time to build that. So that's really, to me, not a concern. You get that experience. And Mr. Kirchhofer, you talk about personal attacks. Well, I hope you consider me in that too, and all the personal attacks that I suffered over the course of this last 4 months, because they were quite a bit and pretty much unfounded. And I think when the reason and the rationale became public for why I wasn't qualified to serve on the board as president, I think people looked at that and said, wow, that's some pretty petty stuff. So we'll leave it at that. We'll move on. This is done, but don't any anyone lay that at my feet of what's happened over the last 4 months, because I didn't start that. It would have been very simple if the board in May would have said, if there were a majority of people who independently came to this thought that, hey, we need to change that, and not by discussion amongst themselves, but let's just say they independently came to that thought that, you know what, rotation really doesn't work for the district anymore, and we need to change it. And if they had brought an amendment, an action item in May to do that, boom, done, over. Nothing would have happened, but it wasn't done correctly. And, you know, so don't blame that on me. I didn't do it. And I want that to be clear, and I want that to be on the record, that none of this was predicated on anything I did, okay? I was just part of that. I was the person who got attacked, and but at the same time, I'm not one to be attacked and not defend myself. So, and that's what I've done, and that's what I'll do in the future if that ever comes up again. But you know, in terms of that, you talked about Ms. Lamont Dixon, and that's fine. But just remember, there are other people who've been attacked, and you know, I didn't appreciate that either. So I'll leave it at that.
Listen, Robert, look,
Madam President,
I want to respond to Robert.
Okay. Mr. Carpenter.
We've all been attacked. Not just you, everybody. We all get the emails. The difference between me and you is I'm not attacking everybody behind the scenes on this board. I haven't attacked anybody on this board behind the scenes.
Madam President, I called a question. For those of you on the outside, a call to question is to stop Robert's Rules procedures. A call to question is to stop the discussion on the motion. So at this time, Madam President, I called a question. I need a second.
Thank you. Mrs. Parker seconded. So we will,
At this point, the board would vote on the motion to call the question. It must pass by a 2/3 majority
which is 5.
and is not subject to amendment or discussion by the board. It is simply an up and down vote on the call the question motion. And yes, 5 would be the 2/3.
Okay, so we have a motion and a second. All those in favor to call the question to end discussion? Motion passes 7-0.
And at this point, Madam President, you would call a vote on the original motion.
Okay, all those in favor of the original motion? Motion, all those opposed? Motion passes 6-1. Thank you. The board will now have a training session facilitated by Mr. Orrin Moore.
Madam President, point of order real quick. We do have another item, BDA local. And when I was looking at this,
Mr. Sitton?
Mr. Sitton, BDAA locals amendment was included in the original motion, as so both have been amended at this point by the board.
okay, so that will include the parliamentarian? Because
That-
BDA local does not include the parliamentarian.
So BDAA local was solely as to the term limits, I think was the term limits and the 2-year term was what was included in the board policy. As to the board operating procedures, it would be the revised version that the committee recommended to the board back in September.
Okay, so the reason I'm bringing this up, this will prevent any more of the discrepancy between procedures and policy, because if we use parliamentarian in the rotation in procedures, someone could always come up in the future and say, yeah, but you're not following policy, because parliamentarian's not in the actual policy.
Mr. Sitton is correct. If the board would pull up the draft that's been provided, it's the first sentence under board officers. The parliamentarian is not identified. However, as we do with many of our procedural manuals, the specificity comes in the procedure itself and not in the board policy. The parliamentarian is not a statutorily listed board officer, which is why it's not included in the policy itself. It was something this board created as part of their own internal governance.
Okay, so one thing I would like, and this doesn't have to be voted on the way I understand it, is have some type of reference on this page at the bottom to refer to board operating procedures, because I think that's where a lot of the confusion came in the very beginning of this, because we were looking at procedures, not policy, and then how they interact.
Is
Mr.
that
Sitton?
something that we would have to have a
It would be
vote
a
on?
motion on another
Okay.
motion on BDAA for an additional revision.
Okay?
However, the board did just adopt the revisions as stated. Mr. Sitton, I can also bring that correction, which I believe is fairly minor in terms of adding the parliamentary and specifically our reference to the board operating procedures. I can bring that at our next time we have a policy
That's fine.
update coming.
If that's cleaner, that's fine.
Yes, the next time we have a
I
policy
just want to make
update.
sure this is not contradicting the procedures. So we
No,
don't
and
have-
it is not as written, but we can certainly add more clarity and substance if the board desires.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Okay. Mr. Moore. No, we're going to stay here. And before you start, Dr. Fagan?
Well, actually, I was just going to ask, before you start to, perhaps for the public side of it, is just to share this is required, that the board and the Team of 8 training is not an optional item, that the board is required to do this, and in humble honesty, for as long as I've been here, this board has chosen to engage in their training. And you wouldn't necessarily know that, but that this is a required exercise that this board typically does on a Saturday.
Right.
Yes.
And I've been fortunate to be a part of your Team of 8 training for probably 3-4 years. And I hope it's a mutual learning experience. I thoroughly enjoyed and learned quite a bit. But as you stated, Dr. Fagan, it is a required training.
And I enjoyed your training Orrin in San Antonio for 1566.
And
we might need an audio.
And Mr. Moore, while y'all are fixing that, I know the board, we just went through, a little time here. I'm going to take a short recess, since we're going to be spending the next at least 3 hours with you, if you don't mind. So 10-minute recess, we'll reconvene in 10 minutes.
That'll let you all do any.
Mr. Moore, we are ready.
All right, enough of all this talk about bacon and hash brown casserole. It's time to talk about what boards do that improve student learning. I hope that's a topic that you all love and enjoy, because it's one I'm quite passionate about. Good. Well, I'm going to consider that to be a study session for what we talk about today. Today is every time spent. Consider today a test of what you all learned, because the bulk of the conversation this morning, today for this team building session, is you sharing with me, with others who might watch or listen to the recording, what it is that your system is doing. And just kind of lining that up with best practices. There is no one set or collection of ideas, but it's a broad spectrum. There are things that you do to reach certain ends that other districts do differently, right? And so if you had a chance to sit and talk to principals, to chief academic officers, whatever the case may be, you'll find today's discussion a bit of share what you learned. In short, we're going to look at what the Lighthouse research called essential levers for school improvement. We use that term interchangeably with conditions. The bottom line is, I'll give you a quick mini-teach. The bottom line is, when people wanted to know if what boards do could impact student performance positively, they set out to go find out what successful districts were doing. Kind of like reverse engineering. Look at what they're doing, make some correlations, et cetera. So in short, the Lighthouse research, they knew that boards that were off task could negatively impact student performance. You've heard that, I'm sure, a number of times. You've seen it in the news, unfortunately, all around the nation. The big question that was asked by a researcher was, well, if they can have that negative impact, can they also have a positive impact? And this student, Mary Delagardelle, went out to go research what boards do that improve student performance. And so what we'll do today is talk about the heart of what they found. I think it's getting back to the heart of what board work is. We'll take a break from the policy and the business and talk specifically about, and I hate to call it the softer element, but it's those things that the people, like you mentioned, the greatest asset, those teachers, the things they're doing, the systems that support them, the leaders that help create and maintain those systems, and then the governors, overseers of the district that make all that possible through their support, through their wisdom, through their guidance, et cetera. You'll see, again, the system working collectively to achieve certain ends that we'll talk about here. But again, I want to talk about the history of it real quick. I'll give you a rundown. I think it's pretty interesting. So the Iowa Association of School Boards, the TASB version of Iowa, set out to look at multi-state, multi-year study. And what they found in a nutshell was that the way leaders spoke about their systems, their kids, their teachers, their employees, made the biggest difference. They looked at rural, smaller areas that were statistically not likely to succeed. We unfortunately know that there's a correlation between low-income areas and student performance. And so they control for that factor. They looked only at lower-income areas, rural areas. In this case, they happen to be lower-income areas. And what they found was that the districts that were moving, the board members, teachers, they spoke and thought differently about their system. They said things like, we believe every kid has limits, but I don't think we've come close to our kids' limits yet. So we're going to push. Right? We think our kids and our teachers are great. They can do it. We're going to invest time and energy. In the stuck systems that weren't meeting academic accountability standards locally or by the state, they said things like, you know what? Parents got to send better kids to school. Or they got to turn the TV off, right? Or you can lead a horse to water, but you can't make him drink. That kind of stuff. Stuff that honestly gets said pretty easily because we know that it's easier to educate a kid when they come to school 100% prepared and parents or guardians or whoever, older siblings, are making sure homework is done at home and just really setting the stage for teachers to kind of come in and, I won't say do the easy work because it's still tough, but do the easier work, if that makes sense. I'm not going to sit here and tell you that we can educate every kid just so easily because we know it's tough. But the fact that these moving districts were doing what the stuck districts couldn't do with the same kid, same situation, meant that how we think and how we respond matters, right? So stuck versus moving, in essence, how we feel, how we think. I'm going to show you some of the conditions and levers that were present for these moving systems. And these were derived from multiple studies. When they looked at a large collection of studies, of school improvement efforts, how, systems transformed, they arrived at a collection of 7 levers I'm going to show you. Now, why does it matter to you as a board? Because the research shows that when board members understand how these levers look in their district, they were leading systems that were moving. Now, I'm going to tell you ahead of time, it might be a bit redundant. I know you're a sharp group. You just spend time talking to your folks about these levers, how these conditions look. You're going to probably see those and recognize, oh, yeah, we wouldn't call it that, but I recognize that from our conversation. But again, the more you understand about these as board members, as higher-ups, the better systems perform. It could be because you work more efficiently, you're quicker. It could be because you ask more informed questions, or you refrain from certain questions. Whatever the situation might be, again, you being informed was the difference between a moving and a stuck district per these researchers, and we'll look at that as well. Your superintendent will play a big role in that. There are things, again, I know you understand, but again, these are things that happen often at the operational level, at the executive level, at the execution level, right? And so she'll explain some of these, but I bet you know a good chunk of them, and you can explain them to us and one another. If you're new to the board, you might not know the ins and outs the way that a veteran board member might know, but maybe you have some familiarity with that. So in short, we're going to look at what some of the things where they found these moving systems. It'll be a conversation. I don't have a whole lot more to say after this other than giving you some of the directives, but it really, truly will be you all as a board member talking about how these conditions or levers look in your district. Ask a lot of questions. Take notes. Because the takeaway for this, and this is the final question, is how do we as board members support this lever or this condition, this particular work? What do we do? What action might we take to further or support this? It might be just keep doing what you're doing. or do less of something. But again, for each lever, the big question that I want you to take notes on is, how do we further support this? What does board support look like? Some will be easy. Some might think, I don't know. I think we just chill out, right? Or we ramp up in this area. It'll make sense once we get into it. So any questions so far? All right, essential levers, conditions that exist in a lot of school reform, school improvement efforts. We're going to talk about how they look in your district. So from here, I want to start with another important part. I want to practice what I preach. If I just told you the way that board members and higher ups spoke and thought about their system was important to success in that system, I want to ask you how you feel about your system. Very specifically, I want to know what you're excited about this year or in terms of your community or your school district. What are you excited about? And in no particular order, as it comes in mind, feel free to share, but I want to get our head thinking about what's amazing, what's positive. And I know there are countless items we could mention, but think about 2 or 3. And as it comes to your head, just share that with the group.
I'll just share, the other day when we went through our presentation with our educational leaders on the data that is being presented to us and the growth that we are seeing from individual students. And they have our literacy assessments in place and beginning with math assessments also, but the literacy assessments now have 4 years growth?
Yeah, I think, well, COVID was a little weird, so.
Yeah, COVID threw us off a little bit, but the bottom line is, being closed up, whatever, no matter what, now we can see individually, every child in this district, at the elementary levels, we can see the growth, and that the measurable growth is a year's growth. It doesn't matter, I mean, they come in behind, but if they make that year's growth, we can actually see that. And now we know the specific skills and the amount of information that can be given to parents now is phenomenal. It's phenomenal. And it's almost like, oh, that great big light bulb. You know, we finally have reached a point where we see and as we grow. And then, of course, I'll mention that one, then I'll let somebody else mention something else. 'Cause there's another one.
Of the
Yeah.
teachers.
There's another one too, yeah.
So for me, it's been a long time coming. When we hired Dr. Fagan, we were looking for something different. We were looking for what Ms. Morrison was just talking about. And the terminology that Dr. Fagan's always used is individualized learning plan. And how do we get everyone from the student, the parent, the counselor, the teachers, the administrative teams, all on the same page for that one student, especially when you have close to 50,000 of those. And this new data approach does that. The other thing that I'm really excited about, we've talked for as long as I've been on the board, and I know prior boards from that we don't judge a student based on a singular test.
Correct.
So we brought in Commissioner Morath and then Chair of Public Ed Huberty in to see, the one question they always had was, okay, y'all want local accountability, show it to us. How do you do that? And they came in, and when they left, Commissioner Morath asked permission to use a lot of our stuff because of those data points and because of this personalized learning strategy. We can show growth or lack thereof of every student in this district with local accountability above and beyond a singular test. And I was skeptical that was possible to get to that point, but we're at that point now on literacy, and now we're adding the math assessments now. And so within 3 years, we'll be able to show a strong local accountability data piece that I would put up against anybody and in getting away from that singular test.
Well, the good part too, excuse me for a minute, is that it's moved into middle school. The literacy part has moved into middle school.
Could I say one thing?
Yeah, I think we can just all pop out, right out.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, I just,
Don't need to call
Just
it.
yell over me.
Rusty, do we need our microphone to be green?
yes, we
Yes,
do.
Oh, we
do
did?
need your
Okay.
mic, just leave it on and move it,
Yeah.
Okay.
turn them all on and kind of move it away. Yeah, there you go.
Okay, so at breakfast with the board, the thing that just was important to me is that those scatter plots are not just scatter plots. Those are our kids. And the fact, like Ms. Morrison said, that we are concerned with that child, where is that child, and what does improvement look like for that kid? Because we know not every kid starts at the same place. And so is that child improving? And my favorite thing from breakfast with the board was the partner teachers. And I just loved their energy. So the worst of the worst, the kiddos that need the most help, the classrooms that need the most help, we have 2 teachers. And so that has just been tremendously successful, and their energy, the enthusiasm. I mean, they love working as a team and helping their students grow, and it was just incredible.
Yeah, and I'm going to brag on one thing here, because we always talk about this research and the aggregate, but I'm always suspicious of the data they're using, right? Because research based on crummy data is crummy research, right? And so what I love about this is, so I'm happy for boards that have been able to move forward and this and that and the other, but what I love is that our data are authentic. It's Martina tests me, and she is the teacher and I'm the student, and we know it's correct. We know it wasn't, I didn't know how to use a mouse, or I wasn't motivated that day, right? So we know our data are good. And then to see these groups of students that we used comp ed money that the state gives us at these ridiculous times of the year and says, you have to spend 55% go, and we use that money to purchase, to hire 50 teachers to double staff the most impacted classrooms in the district. Some of those classrooms outperform the district average with some of the most challenging circumstances imaginable. So, we know our data are good, and we know our strategy is sound, and we can now measure everything that we do based on that data and know what works and what doesn't. And before, there was no good measurement, right? And so I'm just really happy that this board was patient, because Mr. Sinton's right, that when I came, there was nothing that we could really use. And if they hadn't been patient, there are other boards that would have looked at our state data and said, no, stop, go back, do this. And they were very patient with us, because it takes a long time to turn the Queen Mary.
Well, and you think about it, and that's a very good point, Dr. Fagan, because you think about it, patience goes a long way. And I speak from an era where we taught canned curriculum.
Yep.
That's what we taught. But in order to really get to an individualized plan for a child, a canned program is not going to give you that. And so it is so nice to see that we actually understand what this student needs, okay? And that we're not just pulling out a lesson, okay? No, we are setting a lesson for this child. And then you think about a dual language class in a title school, they are making 85 to 90%. And you're going, wow. But it's because it's prescriptive in the sense of we are giving these children what they need. We are taking the resources and actually implanting them where they need to be. And it's the appropriate resources.
Well, and I would say it's not just in the classroom either.
No.
What Dr. Fagan and her team has done is pretty remarkable, because even if you think about the counseling, they've taken a lot off of the counselors' plates, and now we have 504 facilitators. And as a parent, I have 4 kids, the baby's a senior, but, when he came home, even last year, Mom, my counselor called me and I was thinking something was wrong, but she was just checking on me, to make sure I was okay, because they actually have time to even do that on an individualized basis. So all of those pieces of the puzzle matter, and I think you can really see it. And what I loved about our breakfast with the board, outside of all the information they gave us, the excitement of the teachers in the classroom that shared was unbelievable. And for them to say, thank you so much for what y'all are doing, we can feel it in the classroom, to me, that shows that, you know, as a board, we stay focused on the learning and the teaching, the things that are important in the district, it is obviously reflected in the classroom.
Yeah, let me just jump in with, we talk about all the assessment and those things, and, you know, Dr. Fagan's right, and I'm an impatient person, I know that, but there, I also am somewhat analytical, and I see the payoff. I mean, you make the investment, and yeah, the payoff is not in months, it's in years, but it's starting to show, and we can point to, we have hard evidence to point to, so I think that's all great. And I think too, though, I don't think Dr. Fagan and her team necessarily gets enough credit for, because it's not things that the board is doing. I think the board supports, and that our role is to make sure the budget dollars are there, finding the money, making sure that facilities are where they need to be to offer the best environment for student learning and to attract teachers to, I mean, I think somebody wouldn't hesitate to say they want to come to work at Autumn Ridge Middle School as opposed to someplace else where it's not, doesn't have those kind of facilities. And it really, and then in the area of safety, a lot of the things that Dr. Fagan and her team has done, and I won't get into any specifics, but it really scares me when I hear Senator Creighton say, you know, only 7% of districts have a proper safety plan in place. And I know damn well we're in that 7% because I know what is going on, and I'm real comfortable with that, but it really worries me just as a community member in this state to think that, wow, when are those guys going to get their act together? And maybe they should reach out to districts like us and to Dr. Fagan. I know she's serving on a committee because she has no, you know, plenty of time to do things outside her job, but she's doing that too. And then I also look at like our STEM programs and how even from the time my first tenure serving on the board, and that was something I always pushed for, and finally the legislature got on the bandwagon. But what we've done, and what I've seen even over the last few years, and pushing it down into middle schools, not only do we now have a culinary arts, or will, on both north and south part of the district at high school, we're having them at middle school, so kids can start to get, no pun intended, a taste of that field. But I think things we're doing along those areas, and other people mentioned the co-teaching to try to reduce headcount in a classroom without having to have two classrooms. Another thing that Dr. Fagan and her team brought forward, and we can take credit, but it's not, we didn't do it. But all I'm saying is all the things that happen, and that we make sure that we support those efforts, finding the money, communicating to the community about what's going on, because sometimes things aren't always what they seem. And that's our role, to be communicators out there. But I think there's a lot of evidence to be able to show what's going on here. And even going back to the pandemic, it was Dr. Fagan who put her head on the chopping block with saying, no, we're going to do this, even in the face of pretty much the rest of the world. No, we can't do that. We got to hide. And we went on with her and supported that. And well, I think it turned out pretty well, thank goodness. But yeah, you take risks. And she's not somebody, and I don't think this board is a group that shies away from taking risks. You need to do that. And sometimes you're wrong, and sometimes you get burned, but you know what? You don't grow without doing that. And that's what I'm happy to see, that we as a group supporting Dr. Fagan and her team are willing to go along. And some of the things like, we're really gonna do it? Yeah, let's try it. But and usually it'll work out. So I just think those kind of things as a board that I'm happy to see and want to support and want to see continue.
But again, it goes like the future with the CTE. I mean, we've got programs that fit everybody. And the nice part about it is Dr. Fagan's team, though, annually revisits, okay, what are the kids interested in? So now, when a kid walks across the stage, he may not be walking across going to UT or A&M. He may be walking right into business. As, you know, he may be going into air conditioning, or he may be going into culinary somewhere. He may be going into nursing, or she may be doing this. It is that we are allowing our staff to do what they need to do for the kids of the future. And that's walking out on May 27th or whatever graduation is. I mean, because it's phenomenal to watch middle school kids. We went through a building not too long ago, and they took us for a tour, and they showed us their engineering department in middle school. Well, these kids know those terms. They know what they're going, you know, they're beginning to understand the concepts truly. So, I mean, but we celebrate them all, which makes it really, really nice and enjoyable to see kids succeed in every area. Now, are we perfect? No, we got a long ways to go. But allowing her to do that and her staff to do that creates this destination district. And I know for a fact it's real, because when Mr. Sitton mentioned Morath coming here, I have fellow friend board members in other districts that have heard about Humble and Humble's literacy assessments. So I know they're being spoken out there. So.
Hey, I even tell your story too. When I do this. What about over here? I think it's somewhere in this
Come
range
on, you
right here,
newbies.
including Miss Martin.
Well, I'm not gonna say.
not here.
Hey, you're
wanna
on
be
my
mean
turn, my
anymore.
successes.
Yeah.
I love them.
Thursday, well, we always say you have to separate emotion from reality, right? Well, reality Thursday was there was emotion. I mean, those teachers were emotional.
Oh, yeah.
I can remember the gal's name talking about the special needs kid
Mm-hmm.
that had all the tubes coming out of him.
Yeah, that was the
virtual
virtual teacher.
The
so
virtual
the
teacher.
virtual-
Oh.
And, you know, I left,
Pine
Nancy
Forest.
took me, I went back to work, and I told a couple of, everybody that's employed there has either got kids there or grandkids there in the district. And I told the story, because I've got 3 special needs kids that work for me, 2 autistic, and I've got the one that has the epileptic seizures. And I shared that story from Thursday. And all of us on the board, you know, we're all, the Mosaic building. For me, when I first come on the board, and I saw the video that was up here, if you remember last June or July, remember the video? And I was brought to tears. And seeing the world from a wheelchair, from a hospital bed, all the way back to your feet, you have great empathy, right? But this district, listening to that teacher talk, that means this just didn't happen overnight. Everything that your administration's doing in this board and the board before, it takes years. It's, you know, building the foundation, right? Foundations first, then the walls, then the roof, right? And then everything inside it. Well, inside it was Thursday, looking at those teachers. I was blown away sitting there. Chris and I, when that lady was talking, it was like, what's her name, the teacher?
Christy Whitaker.
Yeah.
Yeah, I will tell you this, she testified to the virtual committee of the legislature that was appointed in the last session. And when we were sitting there waiting our turn to testify, all of us, the conversation was, oh, virtual isn't for little kids, that can't be done. I mean, some of my colleagues got up and said, I'm a reading expert, it can't be done. And so the whole group was like, can't be done, can't be done. Christy Whitaker gets up there, and she tells her story. And it completely transformed that whole committee,
Yeah.
like this. It did not, there wasn't one person up there who said, yeah, we shouldn't fund virtual education for young children, not one person. And so literally, the work she has done and the experience she's had and the way she can share it has changed the state of Texas forever.
Outstanding.
Yeah, it's a good listen, and, right?
It's
To hear her.
a great listen for her. And she only told half to you all of what she told the legislative committee. I mean, she makes sure that she sees those kids, they meet at parks. I mean,
Oh,
there's
yeah.
just so much more than even we heard. But Yeah, it's very compelling. And to hear the double staff teachers, what I love about that is, as a former principal, we always saw staff members who might struggle with classroom management, or other staff members who struggle with technology, or, everybody has their strengths and challenges, every one of us. But the fact that we have these opportunities for teachers will keep people, good people, smart people in the profession. Because if classroom management is a struggle for me, I can be a virtual teacher, and I can be an amazing virtual teacher. I might be extraordinary in calculus. If I don't prefer the loneliness, the isolation that can come with the profession of education, of being in a classroom all day with no other adults, typically, I can go to a double-staff classroom, and I can have a partner. If I don't like that, and I don't want another teacher messing with my world, I don't have to choose that. So what we've seen, and what we should have known all along, is personalization is not just for students, it's for teachers. And in a day and age where teacher shortage is real, it's real here, it's real in the country, we need these niche opportunities for staff. It will keep people in the profession. It will bring them to Humboldt ISD. So we've got this just like win-win snowball going with all of those things that you all have said, yep, pay for it. When virtual, I just want to say this, when virtual, because Mr. Scarfo's point, yes, we do the work. We're the professionals. This is our expertise, although we have two professionals on the board too. But we do the work. But there were so many districts that when the state said, we're not funding virtual anymore, right? They said, shut it down. It's no good for kids anyway, just get rid of it. But this board said, because Billy and Liz crunching the numbers, okay, all right, it could cost us this much money, we'll set it aside out of fund balance.
It was $7 million.
$7 million.
We're going to take the risk.
We'll take the risk and we'll take it out of fund balance. You all could have said, no, I'm not doing that. This is not a great economy. This stuff's unstable. COVID's a wreck. But instead, this board said, okay, yep, this is what's best for kids. We're going to do it. And look where we are today. It's going to be funded. Our ADA, we never thought our ADA would return to 95% after COVID because kids don't come to school sick anymore, which is good. But it's at 95%. You provide the right opportunity for all the right people, and it just takes care of itself.
So I think for me, everything that Liz just said, it gets me excited because it's all about leadership for me, right? So everything rises and falls on leadership. And I think when you have a board that allows a superintendent to do what they do best, and that's lead, get out of the way, and let her lead. And I just want to say, to the board that brought in Liz, thank you, right? Seriously. Because she's
They earned that paycheck.
Right. She's a level 10 leader, right?
Don't make his head any bigger.
No.
Don't let our heads get any bigger than they already are.
As a parent, I'm seeing the effects of it. But now being on the board and really being so concerned about teachers, and I think we forget what she just said is so key. Our teachers have an opportunity, if they don't like it this way and it doesn't bring out their full potential and excitement, there's still places here where they can. Where do you get that? You don't get that in a lot of districts. I'm telling you, I have friends that are in districts that are counselors across the country. They're not getting this level of customization and the ability to figure it out and still remain in a district that they really want to. That's huge. But that comes from a great board hiring a great leader, and then a great leader that's a level 10 hiring level 10 leaders, and it continues to filtrate down until you're starting to now see where the impact is. You're going to now have level 10 students, and it just creates this, this ripple effect. And I'm seeing it, and I'm seeing it with my own son. And I'm going to give you a case in point. Westlake Middle School, right? And this is just being complete. We just got to talk the facts here, right? Westlake Middle School, there was a change in leadership. That's it. There was a change in leadership. To go from what I was seeing last year and hearing it from the parents to this year, that was because there was, I'm sure Liz and her team said, you know what, we're going to bring in some new leadership. And you're seeing just a complete transformation of parents that we're still overcrowded. But you know, when parents can see certain things happening, they're like, okay, I get it, I see it. I can see the light at the end of the tunnel. One of the things that Dr. Washington did that as a parent, I met with him before the school year started. And while I was there, I think he had just gotten off the phone, and he was making sure I can't remember, I think it was all of his admin team, and Liz, correct me if I'm wrong, but all of them called all of the special needs students. They picked up the phone and called every single special needs student that was either at the school or incoming. Personal call. Because he said, you know what, I want to make sure that they know that the person on the end of that line, there's trust there. And text message and emails sometimes don't get it, and he wanted to reconnect with the parents. But I'm sure that's just one, right, instance across, you know, this district is really doing some special things. And that's why I'm excited. And I can go toe-to-toe with anybody else in the district that might have an issue. And I can say, well, have you talked to Liz and her team yet? Well, I haven't. Okay, well, why don't you go and set up that meeting? I mean, they're open to it. They'll get you to the right person. So that's what I'm saying. Level 10 leaders, higher level 10, you know, leadership, and it just continues to build the district. And that's what I'm seeing.
You know, and just some final comments on this, because something that Marcus said a minute ago about the board that hired Dr. Fagan. Yeah, this has turned into a little bit of a Fagan love fest.
I'm out.
And I would say well deserved.
Absolutely.
Well deserved because of the comments that have been made. But this is a team building exercise. And so I want to go back to something that Marcus said about the board that hired Dr. Fagan. And I've said it publicly several times. When we came down to our final two, there was a distinct difference between the two. Both of them would have been wonderful superintendents for Humble ISD, no doubt, no doubt. I think we were very thorough. I think the search firm we used were very thorough. But when it came down to it, the question, I was president at the time, the question I asked the rest of the board was, do you want to be safe or do you want to change education? And I fully believed that statement. And without hesitation, every member of that board said, we want to change education for the better, for our kids. And that board stuck together throughout all the growing pains, as Dr. Fagan mentioned. We gave her that room to grow. And as the board has changed over time, the new board members have allowed her to continue to grow and change and have faith. You know, yes, we've had some challenges the last few months. Well documented. But we are, in my opinion, still the cream of the crop when it comes to education in the public sector in the state of Texas. We have a great cohesive board, whether we agree on everything or not. At the end of the day, we come together for what's best for the 50,000 students, 6,000 plus employees, et cetera. And for that, I'm very proud. I'm very proud that we can go through some times and come out stronger because of it and move forward and refocus on kids. And if we didn't have a strong superintendent, though, we wouldn't be able to do that because we turn it back over to her and she takes it and runs with it and then comes back to the board with the validation that what we're doing is working. So I guess I just kind of wanted to sum it up, and I'm proud to work with each and every one of you moving forward.
And she doesn't mind running with scissors in her hand, as she likes to say.
No, I don't. I'm very comfortable with ambiguity, but Mr. Sinton, he really underplayed how difficult my hiring was for the
Oh, now
board.
you must be mistaken.
The board, I probably don't know another board that wouldn't have changed course when it rained down. And I told them that that was going to happen, but they couldn't conceive of the experience. They really couldn't.
Not at all.
And
We had
so-
never- we
That's
had never
okay, you taught us
experienced anything
many
like that at all.
lessons.
And so when the social media rained down by design, a lesser board would have folded.
That's right.
And they didn't. They stayed the course. And it was challenging. Even contract negotiations were challenging because there were people between us. But once we went and sat down and just said, this, we did it, like that, which showed me that, we could get there because they stuck it out. And I think that made me feel even more, I'm always comfortable, moving things ahead and changing things out. But it made me even more committed to proving that if they stood on that line and they took that heat, because there was heat, there was lots of it in this room, that, we had to do great things, And to this day, people will walk up to me and say, man, when you came, I was not for you, I didn't want you, this and that and the other, but I was totally wrong. I was totally wrong. And so I think that's happened for the board too. In the moment, though, it doesn't feel like that. Oh, it's horrible.
Well, there were loads of ups and downs, but the one thing, and I'm gonna, the one thing I will say, and I go back to Mr. Sitton's statement, was the main objective of the board at that time was to move forward. We knew we were good, but we wanted to be great, and we wanted our kids to have every opportunity they possibly could. But we truly could have gone very safe with exactly the status quo and been good. But we very much wanted to move our students forward. So that board was committed. Yes, we didn't know exactly what we were stepping into, but all kidding aside, we were very goal-driven to make sure that our kids had the leader that was, and I'm going to use just plain old gutsiness, to step off that ledge of what traditional education was. We were more than willing. Every one of them sat there. And I was really relatively new, second year. But every one of them were committed to moving our students to the top. So
It makes it easier I believe Liz is a visionary, and it makes it easier to support whatever her dream is that week when I have, and I believe we all have so much respect for you, and we know, not everything will be perfect 100% of the time, but we're taking risks to move the ball down the field and help improve student outcomes and help every single child in this district.
well, it was interesting because one of the very first things she noticed was safety. And then the second one was counseling. It was interesting. She knew right off the bat. And when you've got someone that actually goes out there and views it and sees it, and she's had experiences that we had not had. We had not had those experiences. Now, and it was an eye-opener, but no, we were willing, yes, okay, then all of a sudden, but
And I think what you're also saying is she gets it.
Yeah.
As a former educator,
Yeah.
when she brought up counseling as a parent with 4 kids and had to deal with some things in counseling, I'm like, oh, because a lot of times people move up in education and they forget what it was like when they were in the classroom. And she doesn't forget. Like, she knows very specifically what that looks like, what it feels like, and works to fix it, or change it, or enhance
And-
it.
And it's not just us that feel that way.
That's
So
right. Yeah.
after convocation, I was talking to a group of teachers, and they said, Dr. Fagan should run for president of the United States.
Well, I don't know about that. Well, I don't know if I'd want to.
So it was mentioned.
Right now.
It was mentioned or expressed as gratitude for the board that hired Dr. Fagan. But it's also important to keep in mind that a great deal of gratitude should be expressed for the board that has kept Dr.
Correct.
Fagan.
Right.
And so I think you understand that. But when we talk about, again, the things that boards do that improve student performance, I kid you not, there's a Compass article I made available to you via email. You'll get it if you haven't already. If you read through that, and without blowing up your heads, I feel
Oh,
pretty
please
confident.
blow them up every now
I
and
feel
then.
pretty confident you're going to say, this is like us. The things these moving districts do, they say they believe, the way they talk, how informed they are, how conversant the board members can be in key initiatives that matter for student improvement. I think you'll find that you are that board that they describe. And I share that because I mean that in my heart. It's a reality that not every board can speak in the depth that you just shared with me. That, in smaller systems, in a quarter, a tenth of your size, not every board is as conversant about what's happening and why it's happening, in their system as you are, with 55,000 plus kids, right? Roughly about
49.
49. It's incredible.
Oh, are we at 49 now?
No, we're getting there.
But ADA, I mean, it might be like, weighted.
Yes. Right, yeah.
It's incredible. And again, I want to just take a moment to emphasize that. The way this came to light was when they saw districts that wanted to improve, they started some of the original Lighthouse training, which was a 2-year process, 2-year, 10 sessions. It takes that much time to create just change on the board for some of these systems. And you talked about being patient, how important that was. It is. I mean, we don't turn around, 2 or 3 years of deficit and a challenging outside of school environment in one semester. There are a few cases, but that's not the rule. Those are exceptional cases. Over the course of 2 years and 10 sessions, they found that board members or higher ups started with this much knowledge of the system. They could say things like, we had professional development as a big convocation. I don't remember what it was about. They just couldn't express that detail. Fast forward 2 years, 10 sessions. Oh, our teachers get trained on X, Y, and Z. And when they talk to a kid and they test a kid, they look for this. We are having these deep initiatives in reading and literacy. And just like you said, we're focused on growth. We recognize how important individuality is in education. We don't just teach canned lessons, right? I mean, they could speak the way you just spoke. If I had let you go on another 2 hours, I think you could have gone for another 2 hours talking about things, right? I feel confident. But I want you to see your real life experience corroborated in research and in studies about moving districts, because the big challenge is how to maintain that. And God forbid there's turnover, even if it's for good reason, we understand it's going to happen. But how do we be intentional about maintaining? I don't think it was an accident that you got the team that you got here. You mentioned there were very specific things we wanted in the superintendent. And we wanted to go forward. We wanted to be the best, not just good. Those collection of things limit the number of people you're willing to hire. They limit the stuff you're willing to tolerate in your system, right? But if there were 7 different directions and interests, and this pocket, which represented 2 or 3% of all that goes on, was more important than the big collection, it would be easy for 1, 2, or 3, or even 4 or 6 members or 7 members to get a system off track, for kinder words, right? But it's very intentional. And I think the other intentional part is, how do we maintain this? If and when there is transition, if and when the environment changes, how do we prove to the community and to ourselves that this amazing thing we have here was not just due to luck. It was not happenstance. It was intentional. I think one example is breakfast with the board. Those kinds of efforts are things that you can choose in your discretion. I hope you know now that that was a really good thing for these reasons. Whether we had Dr. Fagan here or someone other person or a different set of board members, we hope this model and that theme is something that carries on. We hope we consider it to be a vital part of our learning and understanding if we're going to make decisions about this system. And you don't let those kind of things go away, right? Again, just think about those things that have made this team work. What has been successful? And incorporate what's been useful, and then, of course, move away from what is not. But most important, think about as leaders, practicing oversight, how do you incorporate those kinds of things into your system for the future? Just like we had a discussion about what you're seeing, what matters, I want to look at these 7 conditions. You have them on your page. You look at the original terms, and then you see how we rename some of them because they just flow better, or they tend to line up more with some of the recent data. The themes and concepts are still the same, haven't changed. But as I already mentioned, when schools reflected the presence of these in their system and the higher-ups understood how they looked, they were leading moving systems. So it'll be a combination of you maybe hopefully learning some new things about your system, sharing a new perspective, and then kind of reinforcing what you know, and then even sharing with me, an outsider, how these look, right? And sharing what you learned in your most recent venture with the event, the Breakfast with the Board. So what I want to do is talk about how these look in your system. Again, the degree to which they exist could vary in district. If you don't have these, doesn't mean you aren't succeeding. It's just that these are key areas. Talk about how they look in your district. And then as we do, here are the key questions I want to answer. We'll probably skip the first one. Why is this lever or condition important? I think it'll be pretty self-explanatory, unless you want to emphasize something for the sake of anyone who might be listening. The big question is, how does it look in our district? That's one thing I want to answer for sure. We won't skip that one. What questions do you have? Again, you have already shown this great propensity to learn and retain information and a commitment to dig deeper into the things that matter. But there might be still a few questions that you have. It's a chance during a team building session to ask questions to kind of gain, again, a shared depth of understanding. And then here's the big question. We're going to jump all the way over to the far right. What actions might the board take to support this condition or lever? Now, I don't want us to have to force anything. Things are going well in the right direction. But if there might be incremental changes that you as a team of 8, as a board especially, can make to further support Dr. Fagan, and I've heard great examples already, then I kind of want to know what those are. And what we'll do is over the course of the year, you might find an opportunity to implement some of these that might become new board operating components, or they might become something 2 years from now. But if they exist, we want to know what actions the board might need to take to support work in that area. Any questions so far? I think it's pretty straightforward. All right. If you can talk, you're going to do great, because that's all it's about, you talking about your system and sharing and teaching, and then, of course, getting new perspective, asking yourselves what more we need to learn, and then maybe by the time it's all done, taking away 1 or 2 things to improve or change. So the first one is distributed leadership. In the conditions they looked at, this was one of the ones that mattered in terms of balancing the overall direction of the district, but recognizing that no 2 campuses are the same. And you mentioned, Mr. Holmes, we have a level 10 leader who hires level 10 leaders. And my guess is that if you hire an 8 or a 9, you're going to develop them to the point where they become a level 10, right? And so you trust what they do. And you mentioned, you hire them and let them do what they do. But there's a balance. There's an overall direction of the district, but then there's also recognizing that no 2 campuses are the same, no 2 areas. And so there has to be a balance between letting people lead and sharing that leadership. How does it look in the district? There's broad-based leadership, provide direction, but it's also sensitive. It also recognizing that we aren't a canned system, and what we decide here filters down but looks different at every campus or for different student groups. How does it look in the district here?
Well, I mean, I would say, starting with the board, I guess essentially the board sets the vision. Dr. Fagan, it was essentially set before I ever showed up on the board. But it's a great vision. And and I worked on, as a community member, actually, on part of that vision when you had the portrait of a graduate. But seeing, I guess, the way that breaks down from Dr. Fagan and her leadership and the vision that she has and how she takes what the board set forth and carries it forward, her team members are amazing. Like, every single one of them. I mean,
Well,
I can't, you know,
that's
it's
a good
an
point.
interesting way that she has brought in the right people to be a part of that team and to say, okay, do you buy into this vision? I'm sure that's part of the conversation. And seeing how that's implemented throughout. And it just keeps trickling down and trickling down.
And if you think about the different areas, I mean, I think about the amount of professional development that's been developed within these realms. And if we take the very first topic, which was safety, a capacity was built in our police chief that, I mean, he's built a force, and now people are, oh, hallelujah, wanting to come to work because of the amount of training that he was given, plus what he gives to his staff. And so he builds capacity within the officers underneath. Then you take the curriculum department and Dr. Johnson and the capacity that she has built in that department, along with Dr. Fagan's administration, what she has, and the capacity that she's built in our leaders. And you can just see the growth in every area. Even take food services and I mean, you just see the amount of capacity that is built within those leaders to build even stronger ones. And I know that may ramble a little bit, but it is amazing. I mean, I look at Chief's department and Dr. Johnson's department and the amount of knowledge and leadership that is there and what it has produced.
You know, at the end of the day, it's about having the right people on the bus,
Yes.
you know, and having the right driver. You know, one huge change that happened, other than leadership changes on the administration level, was Dr. Fagan made a pointed effort to make sure that our building leadership was where it
Yes.
needed to be. Prior to that, we hired principals and assistant principals and so forth, and I don't know if they necessarily were buying into the vision or the direction that the district was going in. And so for a while, I assume it's still happening, but for a while I know the finalists for each principal position, they had to come and interview with Dr. Fagan. So she made the final, she's the driver of the bus. She made the final decision on which one is appropriate for that particular campus and that campus's situation that was going to buy into what we're trying to accomplish versus just putting someone in a seat. And that's not to diminish past leadership at all. It's just a different way of filling the seats on the bus, so to speak. Because after that, if you really truly, and there was a lot of pushback on this one, if you really truly want to change the direction of education, the teachers have to trust that what's being said up here and what's being said from Dr. Fagan and her administrative team, that it's true. And what I mean by that is, don't be afraid to fail. That was a comment that was said over and over and over again to teachers. Don't be afraid to take risk, because if it doesn't work, we're going to learn from that as well. And if there's parts of it that are working, then how do we fix the other parts that aren't working? Because at the end of the day, if your motivation is to move kids from good to great, to move kids from where they're at and growing, teachers have to have the ability and the autonomy to take risk in the classroom for that specific student, because they're the only ones that see that student. And And there was a few years. I think it was Daggett that came in before you that said, you know, you got three different groups. You got the group that's on the bus already. They're ready to go. Then you got the group that's going to kind of sit there and go, well, yeah, I want to trust you, but I'm kind of on the fence. But, you know, so you want to move them to the first trimester also. Then you got that other third
You got the
that
naysayers.
they're just not going to buy into it at all. So the idea is start diminishing that outer third and moving more people to the front of the bus, so to speak. And it took a few years. It took a few years to get there. And so as we hire new teachers, they're hearing the stories now. It's okay to fail. It's okay to take a risk. And it takes them a little time to believe that, and the cream rises to the top. So it's not just about changing curriculum. It's not just about having the right accountability pieces in place. It's really getting the right people on the bus and getting buy-in at every level of the organization, all the way down to the cafeteria workers, the bus drivers. I mean, we really take pride in making sure the bus drivers and the cafeteria workers know that you're as important in this as everybody, because you're the first person those kids see in the morning. And then a lot of times you're the last person they see at the end of the day. And that's a huge part in the mentality of being successful in the classroom, not just, yeah, we got plans in place. And, go ahead.
Consistency with accountability. Everybody is accountable, okay? So not only, I mean, everybody gets evaluated, you know, consistently now. But, I mean, the accountability is there. And so it's a fair shake. You work effectively.
But can I even actually go back before I was on the board that year? Because I know I mentioned Portrait of a Graduate, but what I would like to say, that year, I know Dr. Bacon was going through a lot because she was new here and there was a lot happening with that. But she gathered, I think there were like 80 of us. We were on the dream team. She called us the dream team, so I'll just claim that.
It was all true.
But it wasn't. But it was made up of. So she didn't just come in and say, "No, this is how this is going to be." She actually listened to the feedback. That group was made up of parents, teachers, staff members, administrators, students, PTA people, community volunteers, business owners in the community, and we met and met and met, and we kind of shared what that vision looks like for our entire community, so not just the district. And then she took that and just, bulldozed, and just took it and ran with it, is the best way I could say it. But but to me, that is where it all even started, after the board set that vision, and then she didn't come in and just say, okay, it's gonna be my way or the highway. She listened and said, okay, what's the best way to pull all of this together? And obviously, she is a master conductor because she pulled all of those pieces. And what I would say essentially is a masterpiece. I mean, I'm serious. And she knows, I always say, our superintendent's brilliant. So, but just to see how it all has come together is pretty amazing.
And so if you look at your highlights of key elements, I'm just going to go through here.
Yeah.
Okay. If you look at us, okay, we started at the top, okay? And the leadership keeps the focus because it goes all the way down. I mean, all the way down. There is a democratic process in everything we do. Everything we do. I mean, teachers are involved, parents are involved, kids are involved. I mean, everybody's involved, community members, no matter what. So we identify our needs through that democratic process, and we create solutions, and then we do it.
I'm glad you mentioned the highlights of key elements. And again, I didn't write this for y'all.
No,
this
it's really
is what
nice.
they
I like
found,
it.
right? And then looked at, well, here are the moving successful ones. How does it look? When I heard you talk about the things that happen, one, distributed leadership or shared leadership, it started with the community. Too many people expect systems to do things to them. And that means that there's a bit of a passive involvement or passive engagement. But when they're a part of something helping define that, that's sharing the leadership. We want to start with you. You're going to help shape that vision. That causes people to stop and be responsive and thoughtful about what they want, what they're going to ask you to invest energy in, what they're going to be willing to support. I like that. It starts with integrative leadership all the way down. It's vigorous. She runs with scissors. She does all that stuff, right? But you all do similar things in supporting. Keeps the focus, right? All the way down to how we decide things. It wasn't just one person's vision. It wasn't only the board's vision. It was a collective effort. All the way down to identifying needs. She first noticed safety and counseling, right? And it goes on from there. These are what they noticed in those moving systems that were highlights of that shared leadership. And when I think about what I heard in the beginning, something I want to point out I think is very important. I think Mr. Holmes said those teachers are some of the most valuable assets. And I've heard all of you refer to the teachers in different capacities and what they do. And I think your superintendent mentioned we recognize that teachers recognize they all have different skill sets. And some might want to be a team player with another teacher in the classroom. Some might want to do this or do that. Our job is to make sure they can be successful in a number of different ways, and that attracts people, especially in an environment where teacher shortages are a very real thing.
That's right.
That's sharing the leadership with teachers. I get the pleasure of working with anywhere between 39 and up to 50 boards on a full year. And I have heard, and maybe you've heard something similar, you may have heard teachers in other states, maybe not Texas, not in this district, express this idea that what the board does, what they pass down, is something happening to them, as opposed to with them, for them. And I've even heard it, and I don't think it was intentional, but I've heard board members say, well, did you tell them the board was asking for this? A conversation with the superintendent about some new thing they wanted for the teachers. Did they know it's coming from us? And the reply in her eyes said, yes, they know. And they're used to that because that's the way it has been, and it's tiring, to be honest. And what I'm getting at is this idea that when you all think about your teachers, you're setting them up to be successful because you aren't just doing things that happen to them, you're doing things along with them, right? I love the idea that you are well aware of what they go through. You hear about what's important to them. You are setting up different ways and environments for them to succeed. And they're going and testifying about, hey, you may not think that this particular, pathway for teaching is successful, but I can tell you story after story and experience, and it's real. Virtual learning can be effective. You haven't figured it out? That might be something you need to look at, right? But it can be done. I think it's admirable. It's a great example of how your system really does promote shared leadership. Look at all levels of the system. We expect great results. And then Ms. Morrison mentioned accountability. Hey, it's not a free-for-all. There's accountability. Right? If you're gifted, and it's a very consistent process. I love that. A few more minutes, and then we'll check in and see if we want to get a break. Any questions that you have about shared leadership? Questions for each other, for your superintendent, about shared leadership?
I actually interview every finalist that's an AP and above in the district, so.
I was just about to ask you.
That is, it's assistant principal on, I don't mean it on up, but you get the idea, right? And I believe that's part of being the keeper of the focus and the vision is it's a two-way interview, right? So it's a conversation. It's a rigorous conversation, but it's me letting them know who we are, where we're going, why we're going there, and them telling me how they can contribute to that. And if they agree with it, I mean, it's no different than the Dream Team. At one point, I joked with that 80 people in the room and said, if you all just want me to focus on standardized tests, let me know now, and they didn't, and I knew they wouldn't. But I wanted that validation because when you go down these other pathways and you don't focus on just the test, you're not going to have the A+ score, and that's okay with me. I don't care what my kids' scores are, my two children, because I know the reality of the test. But it can get scary for a community.
That's right.
Right?
That's right.
And so that's why I needed to say to them, if you want me to focus on the test, tell me now. We'll start drilling your kids 3 months before the test, and we'll make sure that they, that we can, but they're not going to get all this other good stuff, right? And the community was very loud in saying, we care about the other good stuff, right? That's what's important to us. That's what our kids love. If you take that away from them, you will change their mental health, you will change their motivation for school and for life, their friendships. I mean, they got it. So I felt so fortunate to be surrounded by a community that totally understands the reality of the high-stakes testing movement. So we got to move on from there and go down this path, so, but it is about keeping that, and it's hard in a big system to keep the vision alive and for people to own it themselves. You know, because literally, I've sat down with Bill Bennett, former Secretary of Education, and he has said to me, I agree with everything you're saying, I just don't think it's possible. And when he says that, he means lovingly that he doesn't believe all teachers have the capacity to do what I believe is best for children, and I do believe that. So, so we've parted ways on that, but, you know, so he's a person who says, you know, you gotta give them the best lesson and make everybody do it, right? But I don't believe that. So, in any case, I think that's a hallmark of our
He doesn't
system.
believe that, thank goodness.
You know, and something you said about getting that buy-in and the teachers knowing they have a voice. It hadn't always been that way. You know, at Breakfast with the Board, I think it's a taboo to actually voice an accountability piece that the board purchased. But we were pushing really hard for data, and we weren't getting the data we were looking for. And so we basically had said, go find something that we can use that would give us the data. Teachers absolutely hated it, but because there was no buy-in. And this is what the board wants, this is what you're going to do. That was the kind of the messaging out there. And when Dr. Fagan came in, one of the first things she said after she she spent a year assessing everything. And then she started ticking them off one by one. She goes, now why are we using this? It's horrible. Well, because the administration said that was the only thing available to give us what we were looking for.
Quick and dirty, bad data.
Yeah,
Oh, yeah.
and at the end of the
And I hated
day,
it.
I mean, and that's not our business. Our business is to show the public that, yes, we care, and here's data that we're gathering. And as we found out, the data we were gathering was terrible data. Yes, and it just didn't make sense, and it was adding more work to teachers. While we had great intentions for what we were trying to accomplish, it was bad. And so she said, can I get rid of this and start over? Absolutely. And that's when the teachers were brought in, and that's when the buy-in at all the different levels started happening, and we saw at Breakfast with the Board, several of them alluded to this old way of doing things that was terrible, and I'm sitting there going, yeah, that was me. The idea, though, that these teachers now love the way that we're doing it and the way that we're collecting that data, and it's real meaningful data that we as a board then can use to say, look, you know, we can talk about accountability all day long, A to F, STAR test, whatever, but here's the reality. The reality is that the majority of our kids are growing from one year to the next, and we can prove that. And the teachers have bought into that idea. So that's been a long road to get to this point. And as Mr. Scarfo said, we're not always that patient. We wanted it yesterday.
Well, in changing the mindset of, okay, I enter at first grade and I end at the beginning of second grade. Well, that's not necessarily true, okay? Because you may not enter at 4 years old or 5 years old at the same level. But if you make a year's growth, that is excellent. And that, we know the kids are growing, okay? Now, and haven't we always stated, all kids learn differently? Okay, so, all right. But if a child makes a year's growth, he has done his part.
and your
And
superintendent.
he should be celebrated for that.
Right, and we talked about one of the downsides of looking at only the aggregate. You can see 90%, which sounds great, but then if you're 90% year over year, there are 10% of students who are not being captured. But when the focus is growth, no one gets to hide, right?
But you have to be willing.
And you got to have the data. You got to have the commitment to
Yeah,
the
you
process.
gotta be willing.
And
to go out
what
there.
popped into my mind when I read that distributed leadership was what Mr. Sitton touched on, was the building leadership. And each campus in the district is so unique. And so the buy-in is improving outcomes for each student, but the leadership at each campus, this principal may not be the best fit here, but maybe great, and Liz and her team, Rick, I mean, you're just so good at getting the right leadership at the right place.
Quick question, personal. Think back to your last job interview, or maybe you joined a club or some association. Think back to that process. Were you asked how well you love or jive with the mission or the vision of that company, that association, that group? Were you asked that in the interview or the application process? Were you even asked if you know the mission or the vision?
I don't think I was
I
asked.
bet you were asked about the
I don't
role.
think I was asked.
You're probably asked, why do you want this role, right? Or why does this job matter? But how often are you asked about the vision and mission, and do you truly love it? That's an important question. I don't know that it's asked often, but I'm glad to hear that here it's one of the most important things. I've asked teachers, when did you first learn about the district's vision and mission? You went to the website, you probably applied online, but did you stop and read it? Were you asked about it in the interview? And then I asked, as an employee, when were you first oriented on it? And I've heard things like, well, it was probably at the front of the employee handbook. I don't know that it was expressly emphasized. But the hire was already made, and they needed the teacher, no doubt about it. But when was the connection or the match truly made? And I know we can't always be as selective as we want to be, but I still think that introduction to the vision, the mission, at an early stage is important. You want to set the tenor and keep it consistent. It has to be at that level when you're making that relationship and finding out they're a good fit. So I would have bet that a lot of good success experiences can be attributed to the fact that, well, early on, we understand that these people or these persons are going to be good fits with the mission and vision, and they're going to be promoted and carry it with the same intensity that we do.
Well, the other part of that too is then if you have a leader who's going in a completely different direction that you think is like, what is that, right? It allows me to say, remember when we talked about this and you told me this? So help me understand how that jives with what you're doing. And it's sort of this like, it's false advertising if they say, oh, I love that. That's the greatest idea ever. And then they go and they do the opposite. They are command and control, drill and kill, not allowing teachers to try things that are best for, when they go that way. And oftentimes it's people, that was my previous experience. That's what I know. So that's what I do. And I just said what I thought I had to say in the interview to get the job. But for me, it's like, no, we made a commitment, right? We agreed. And so I'll help you get the training, but the commitment is not negotiable.
And that's another important part, the leader. I mean, gosh, as leaders, you get yourself in a tough pickle, and sometimes you think, well, we just need a body. We need people. But sometimes the leader has to be reminded of that vision and that mission, because they're the ones who are going to really hold and protect it. And so if at any point the board or the superintendent or the campus level principals begin to kind of stack on that vision, they might not step up and correct someone, pull them back in if they're out there. But we need them there. Well, do we need them or do we need the vision to be protected? Right? And if we can find some way to guard the vision and work a little harder, we owe it to our kids. I think it's a very important point, too. It keeps the leadership aligned. Don't let it be said as it was said about one outfit. They have the best procedures and best vision and mission, but no one adheres to it, right? Where's the vision and mission? Where's that commitment? If you don't have a full commitment to it, then you really don't have it.
Well, and Oren, can I say one thing? And also at breakfast with the board, one thing I noticed was one of the leaders got up and shared that she wasn't seeing progress the way she wanted to see on her campus. So I think she shared how she actually reached out to administration to help her through that process, and now today she is where she, needs to be. But I think even recognizing that in yourself as a leader is super important, and it was great to actually see that progression. So it's not that she just sat there, well, I'm gonna just do what I wanna do because it's not working out. No, she reached out to that department and said, okay, I've tried this, I've tried that, I need assistance. And so it's having each other's back as well. So yes, it's leadership, but it's also a teamwork, right? So.
And speaking of teamwork, what about this one? This is a tough one. Connections across the system for continuous improvement. And I mentioned teamwork. It's tough because if you have 15 heavy bricks to move, it's sometimes tempting to look at someone else and say, I'm sorry, I can't help you move yours, I got my own, right? It's tempting. But how does Humble ISD make these connections across the system, different departments, divisions, for the sake of continuous improvement? Whether it's a community, whether it's transportation, whether it's instruction, leadership, whatever the case may be. How do you see your district making these connections across the system, all with the same motive, all with the goal of improving things for kids? What examples have you seen? How does it look here?
I think, when you look at our agendas, everything goes back to the pillars. Whether it's construction, finance, everything ties back to the pillars, and it stays consistent. And it takes everyone, just like we were talking earlier, having the right people on the bus, whether it's the bus driver, the cafeteria worker, et cetera. I think it's that consistency that one person, whether it's the building principal, it's the instructional coach, the teacher in the classroom, or all the way up to Dr. Fagan or the board, it takes each and every one of us pulling the rope in the same direction to get where we're going. And I've seen that strengthening over the last several years now, because I think again, we went from board mandates to collaborative thinking and staying out of the weeds and saying, okay, this is what we want, this is the end result. And those of you that are qualified, Dr. Fagan and her team, go out and implement that, report back to us and say, early on, is this what you're looking for? Because I'm not sure that's what you were talking about. And then that collaborative speak between the board and Dr. Fagan is, no, we really are looking for this. Okay, well, that's what I thought, but that's not where we're heading. And then you start massaging it, start moving in a different area. Then it comes down to, once she has a clear idea and we're on the same page, then she can then go out and implement that and duplicate that all the way down at each level. And she's been really good at not micromanaging. And I think the board has gotten really good at not micromanaging her. I was at Region 4 the other night, and I said, there was 1 year, and this was probably 10 years ago, where we gave Dr. Sconzo 21 initiatives that he had to check the box on in that year. 21. And we laughed about it after the fact because
I was working at that.
one of those was CTE certifications.
Okay.
All right, with no directive of what CTE certification should look like. And we received a whole bunch of first aid and motor safety certificates. So they were able to check the box off that was accomplished. That's not what we wanted, but that was the way that we communicated. And so I think that teamwork aspect, again, it all goes back to, this is all working together. It all goes back to what we were talking about and getting on the same page here first, and then then filtering that down or cascading that down all the way to the classroom teacher and being consistent with it, holding them accountable, all those things. And we're really, really finally starting to see the fruits of that labor.
Quick question.
I was going to say that when your example of you got 15 bricks sitting there, and I may have a pile too, but you say, well, how am I going to get somebody to help me because they're busy? I think it really comes to the culture that you try to establish, and that's a slow process in an organization, especially when you're trying to change the culture. But I think as you really start to do that, and people buy in, and they say, you know what, okay, yeah, I'm up to my eyeballs too, and think, but I'm going to help you move your 15 bricks because I know when I get to that point, I'm going to be able to count on you because people see that helping you to achieve what you need to do is going to help me achieve what I need to do because it all comes down to like the last item, like last bullet there, collective efforts to improve because it's the right thing to do for kids because you're going to have that impact. But it's a hard go to get that, to get people to believe in that culture to say, are you really, we talked about that earlier, yeah, or you just is that just a headline,
But you're in the process, you've built the checkpoints into everything. I mean, every department has its own checkpoints. It's like the beginning and the middle and the end, So now everybody has that period of growth, just like a kid's period of growth. We're, in every department. So, I mean, it's not like beforehand, okay, maybe we'd check on this or we would not. But now they do. They have those checkpoints.
And I think also something that Mr. Sitton said earlier, he uses the bus analogy. I would
love
say,
the energy bus.
I say, what is our district standard, right, across the board?
Mm-hmm.
So, and I think we strive, and we've had challenges in our district, I wouldn't want to say, I don't really think Dr. Fagan was a challenge. I just think there were other things happening, but it wasn't her. It was all the other craziness surrounding it, right? But then we had, I came on the board, we had Harvey. That was a huge challenge. COVID and mask and no mask and all of that. People telling us we can't have graduations and all of that. That was a serious challenge, right? Imelda.
Yeah.
We've had some challenges in the last few months, but ultimately, we strive to be the best in every area.
Yep.
So that's our facilities, our resources, the finances, as Mr. Scarfo mentioned earlier, to allow the teachers to have the resources that they need. Even benefits. I mean, we manage our own insurance program. I mean, so literally in every single area. With our training, we bring in the best even for our training. So I think when I think about the continuous improvement, yes, we have the board and the superintendent, and it goes all the way down to the classroom, and we have these great students, right? 49,000 of them. But then you also hear other things, like, for instance, we've been dealing with challenges over the summer. And for me, it can be challenging in those types of environments, but I've had so many teachers reach out to me and administrators reach out to me, way more than naysayers, right? And say, you're doing such a great job. We're supporting the board. We support you in this role. And even I went to National Night Out recently. Several of us went at Water's Edge, and there were people that were like, I was waiting for you to get here so I could tell you that I support you in this role. And so then you're like, okay, this is, I know we'll get past this too. This too shall pass, right?
Yes.
But so it kind of always comes full circle. And those connections, I just see it, it's just always moving and it's flowing and it's a beautiful thing. And so I don't know. So we say information flows in all directions. It truly, truly does, so.
If you disagree, say so, but I think unless you make connections across the system, it's almost impossible to truly have a model that is individualized. You really can't serve every kid if you aren't willing to make those connections. Is that fair to say?
Absolutely.
The example that Mr. Sitton mentioned, and because you mentioned it, I'll use it as an example. In a system where the outcome was shared or stated, and maybe it wasn't a perfect outcome, but there was no collaboration on kind of truly how it looked, you can get a lesser product. You can get the lowest bar, right? But in a system where there's collaboration and plenty of connections, to Mr. Scarfield's point, if I know that we have an individualized model here, and my job is to produce the best outcome for each kid, I don't mind helping you lift your bricks because the culture we've developed assures me that at some point you're going to help me do my work. And if the culture says it from the board, it's okay to fail, I have full confidence that I don't want to set the bar low because it's easy to achieve and because I got to lift my own bricks all by myself and because I need to get the quick win. Instead, I can say, I can set the bar high because I know there's going to be support, there's going to be grace, right? All these things. Because we're making connections across the system from the board level to the classroom, everyone knows that we expect the highest outcomes. We're going to support you in achieving those. We're going to support you in making corrections if we don't get there. We're going to develop you. I mean, it just seems, again, all these things working together. And we can afford to listen to what the community is asking for because we're not afraid to take the risk to go out and actually do it. If you were afraid to miss expectations, you would define them only in your narrow box. You wouldn't bring in parents. You wouldn't bring in the rest of the world, right? You would do what was easiest. You look at your data and say, where's the next big win, the next easy increment, and you would go for it.
Yeah.
But the minute you open yourselves up to have a collaborative conversation and collaboration, it gets a little tough because you have to work strategically to incorporate other people's perspectives and opinions if you truly want buy-in. And that's the power of making these connections across the system. So what they found in terms of highlights, and again, I'll blow your head up this time. I bet you're going to find a lot of these in your own culture and practices. Shared decision making. Talked about it ad nauseum. We've already seen how that looks. Information flowing in all directions. The fact that you sat down with the teachers and administrators at the breakfast of the board shows that you're receiving, you're listening. You're hearing the things Dr. Fagan says, right? An ongoing emphasis on improvement, obviously. I heard someone say, we aren't where we want to be yet. I think it's Ms. Morrison. But, you know, we're not perfect, but gosh, y'all still, you know, pedal to the metal. And then this one, collective efforts to improve because it's the right thing to do for kids. I don't care what we do here, what we say, what we call ourselves, we want to do what's right for kids. I don't care how uncomfortable it gets. And that was a big one. The community might have some different perspectives and, you know, how do you describe it? The rain came? What was it early on? It rained? I forgot. Either way, the rain. Yeah. It wasn't easy. But we'll end for a break here on one of my favorite quotes. I may have shared this before. I love Ronald Heifetz. Yeah, he says you have to be comfortable leading through disequilibrium, those rough periods.
Without being the lightning rod.
Yes, right?
That up a little bit.
But yeah,
That's
so
You
important.
have to give us that.
Because it's a sign of disequilibrium or discomfort or, you know, apple cart upsetting. A lot of people change directions because they want to quickly put that fire or that voice out or down because it's uncomfortable. And people think that as leaders, their job is to truly and quickly meditate. And a good degree it is. But if you don't lead the community through those periods of disequilibrium that are required to get to the other side, right, then when is it going to happen? You'll get right to the edge, and when the turbulence kicks up, you'll back off. And just chronic failure to launch, right? But I'm so glad I've listened to this board time and again, and no one said, man, we got the right person, and it was just breeze all the way from there. All we needed was the right person. No one said that. It's like, we got the right person, and we assured ourselves repeatedly when things got rough that we got the right person, right? And we made the decision over and over again to accept the fact that we knew we had the right person, and we stuck it out. And I think you're seeing great results.
Oren, just real quick.
Yeah.
So speaking on that, the toughest board meeting I think I've had is the one right after Harvey.
Yeah.
And we had parents in here, and the state actually, telling us to split up Kingwood High School. And parents upset about us sharing the location with Kingwood and Summer Creek. It was really tough.
Yeah.
People were talking about Brown versus Board of Education and segregation, and I was also flooded, right, with 42 inches of water in my house. That was literally the toughest meeting that I've had to sit through. And, you know, it's like beauty after the ashes, before the ashes. But then after that happened, the relationship between Kingwood and Summer Creek ended up so beautifully. And it's just amazing how you can go from that to here,
Interesting.
when you're talking about collective efforts and staying the course, and really the bottom piece, doing what's right for kids. Because our whole point was, we're not splitting up a group of kids that are part of one high school, and essentially almost all of them were flooded. That's not what's best for them. So we're gonna expedite in building and planning, getting their school open again before the school year is over. We're gonna do this, we're gonna do that. Dr. Fagan, I know, was out there in her rain boots working. I mean, she wasn't, yes, she was superintendent, but she was out there on the front lines in Kingwood assisting as well. I'm just saying that was a true test to the board and our entire community.
And you can't really get there without everyone understanding that having that shared depth of understanding.
That's
the
right.
Same intensity for the vision and for what you want for kids. I don't care whether you're sweeping floors or doing equations on the board, that same level of intensity is required. Look at your watches, your clocks. 5 minutes, is that enough?
Yes.
From whatever time your clock says now, right?
Okay.
Don't be trying to sneak in extra minutes. I'm watching
Y'all
y'all.
can turn your mics. Yes. Y'all can talk in the box at the game at 2:00. Go ahead.
Any questions about this particular condition
I know, I'm just
and
messing.
lever? And again, the reason I'm asking is because
For all of
it,
us.
if it ever
Yes.
didn't exist, or it didn't exist to an effective degree, I would want the board to be able to correct that without micromanaging, right?
Right.
Any questions about this particular lever? I guess Dr. Fagan make some notes and questions and share that at a subsequent meeting. But think about that. If this wasn't existing to the degree that we thought it should be, so we could effectively work towards a vision, how do we as a board address it? So think about that. But just for sake of conversation, any questions right now on your mind? All right, next one. In my experience, and you might have similar experience in your work or in the district, et cetera, in your own profession, this is a tough one because it depends so much on leaders or a group of leaders' ability to keep people motivated. And in a world where everything gets old quickly, this is a challenge. I mean, you see it was described once, we start a new program or an initiative, there's a group of employees saying, okay, we'll give it some time till they get tired, right? This may be the new thing, but how long is this going to last? We'll wait it out. They aren't convinced that it's here to stay. This is a challenge, not just creating key initiatives, but sustaining them. How does it look here? What's your secret to sustaining? What has kept people working hard? How long have you been here, Dr. Fagan? Remind me.
This is my 7th year.
That is a good long tenure for a superintendent. What has kept folks? And actually,
Dog years.
I'm gonna rephrase my question. I was gonna ask what has kept people from getting burned out, because I bet you all have been burned out at some point or another. What has kept folks coming back, reigniting the flame when it goes out? What is it? What is your secret? It may not be one single thing, but what has helped?
I think that just based on everything that we've all been saying, because it hadn't always been that way. I mean, what you said a minute ago just kind of woke me up there, that initiatives that were happening, the response we were getting, well, if we just wait them out, if we just wait them out, this too shall pass, and we're going to change direction again. The fact that the collaborative nature of change that's occurred over the last 7 years, and the buy-in at every level, okay, and then what we're seeing here, using data to focus it, not a test. Our curriculum department and their professional development is all tailored to what those teachers are asking for, not what we're pushing to. So by that shared workload and everyone pulling in the same direction, I think that is a big reason why we don't have the burnout. You're going to have some, but we don't have the massive burnout that maybe we had in the past, or maybe other organizations have, because we're giving every member of the organization opportunity for ownership.
And we have the best calendar probably in the state, where we have like a week off every month. So if you, even as an educator, or probably the country, as a former educator, teachers do get a little burnt out, even if they're loving it, right? But then you have a week off.
So very people-centered. I mean,
Yes.
you think about what people need most in life, more of, maybe a little money, but really time is what. That's incredible. I didn't realize that.
Oh, teachers
You have
love
to
it.
have
I
time
didn't
to
realize that,
breathe.
yeah.
You have to,
They love it.
you have to have time to refresh.
Right.
And hopefully you're seeing how a lot of these levers are interrelated. There's a good chunk of overlap. Again, talking about systems, not single things.
But if you create an experience they can't resist, right, as a whole, whatever business, but for Rumble ISD, the experience, if they can't resist it, like teachers want to come here, kids want to be here, parents want to be here, right? You win. I mean, it's an absolute, and that's what I feel, and I think most of the board members up here would say the same thing. The move in the last year and a half, coming off of COVID, and you see it this year, and now everybody says, well, the real estate market here is slowed. Yeah, no. I mean, you're going into Thanksgiving, into Christmas, but we're going to see next spring, the houses fill back up because they're coming from all over to get here into the district, right? And it's because you've created, I mean, Dr. Fagan and her team, they've created this experience. I mean, call it whatever you want to, but there's this buzz that people, you know, I call it the carnival experience. If you have that all the time, everybody wants to come to it. Controlled chaos is another word, right? But that's just,
And we're what, 96% hired? Is
yeah,
that correct?
but that,
Is that unusual? I mean, I'm sure you've talked to a lot of districts. I mean, I know the answer, I'm just saying.
whatever, yeah.
We're 100% hired in food service. Can you believe that?
Hey, and I have no doubt that she created that, but
Right.
but don't forget, she would not be here if you
I
all
agree.
were wacko.
Well, the other
That
side
is
of it
right.
is, I remember when they brought the first calendar to us, okay, this different innovative calendar, okay? And I remember listening to teachers saying, oh, that's too long for these kids to be out. But then I heard teachers saying, but we're tired. We are tired. Okay, first year, we went with it, and then all of a sudden, it's like the kids came back refreshed, the teachers came back refreshed. It's like, oh, well, I actually got to read and do research that I needed to do on somewhere else, but I was still working, but I didn't resent it. It's like I was able to absorb it without stress.
And it goes back to what you said. You mentioned we wanted to change education. Did we want to change education, or was it, or be safe? What was it?
Do we want to change education and the way it's being taught? Or do we want to be safe
Yeah.
and status quo?
Yeah. And what's so good about that? Take a moment in a team building session, which I'm supposed to review roles and responsibilities. It's like the opposite of micromanaging, right? When you think about who in the system is charged with thinking in this visionary streak, right? Who does that? If no one is thinking with that big picture outside the box, that visionary approach, it might not happen in the system. We want our teachers to think big, but also they got to have their heads in the classroom. I don't think systems would do well if teachers were constantly coming up to the board telling them, let me tell you what you got to do about X, Y, and Z tax initiative, right? The input matters, but again, their primary role is there. And vice versa, systems wouldn't do well if the board members were in the classroom telling teachers, let me tell you what you need to do. Because I taught 117 years ago, and I can teach you a thing, right? It doesn't work. I may have shared this story about one board. This is really out of state, and I won't say where. But a board member told me during a conference, hey, I think we need a paradigm shift. I said, what do you suggest? She said, the whole balcony 35,000-foot analogy is not effective. We need to be down in the classrooms more. I know y'all call that the weeds. We should be down there more. And I said, okay, ma'am, well, if you do go down to that level more as a board member, and board members go and do that, who's standing at the top on the wall? watching, keeping that big picture view. If that's the role you want, then do it, that's fine, but someone still has to play that role. You can't go far without someone playing that visionary role. And I think this is a good example of what you mentioned, right? If we had stayed safe, it's not being a visionary. It's good for a week out. But what about in the future? I love that. Now, as a result, you have an unconventional calendar. I haven't heard about that. And it's paying off. It gives, here's the funny thing about it. It's common sense, but apparently not common. It gives people what they need, what teachers need almost more than any other profession, a doggone break. Right? And I love that you talk to the people and ask them. It reminds me of the small school seminar. One superintendent said, when we decided to go to a 4-day week, we did the research. And he said, and then we talked to the community. And we had this go rate. I think some 60, 70% said we want to do it, and that was enough. If you don't get the buy-in, he said, don't do it. You're doing this for the people. Don't do something for the people they don't want or need. And so I love that approach. Again, that's connection across the system, is making sure that you share that leadership decision and that work. So I love that.
So can Dr. Fagan reiterate what she just said? We're 100% hired for cafeteria? Yeah. I'm going to make you laugh because I know you. Yeah. Someone sent me something yesterday that said Martina was out begging for volunteers in the cafeteria or something online. And I'm like, what? I'm not sharing with Chris. So we're 100%. So I just want to make sure because I have not begged for volunteers in the cafeteria.
Yeah, Billy
anywhere.
just
wanna be
told me
clear.
about 3 days ago that we're 100% hired in food service.
Gotta get
They're
those
about
people
to
fed.
add 25 new positions, and so they're
In
gonna,
food services?
Money.
and they're going to add they're having a job fair today for custodial, food service, and transportation, so.
How many,
I'm so glad to hear that.
y'all are facing, I forgot last time we talked,
Outstanding.
y'all had added some large, crazy number of students over the year, over the 1 year. What was that?
Yeah,
growth?
last year was 2,800 students in one single year.
We
It
talked
was-
about it because there was typically more kids than the
Well, we're
average
about
school
we
in
grew
Texas.
somewhere between, in our worst COVID year, we grew by 500, but typically we grow around 1,000.
Yeah.
And so then 2,800 was unprecedented. But, Autumn Ridge Middle School was supposed to open this year with about 750, 800 kids, and they're at 1,000.
So they're at
Um,
Jeez.
Summer Creek is at, 3,500 now, I think. So the growth continues, and we've even really reduced our, we're really doing a much better job with address affidavits, because we had 1,000 students with really not very legitimate address affidavits. So that's even with that in the mix.
Yeah. I'll state the obvious. A board in your situation can't be focused on the small things. Be aware of it and know that you're paying someone to, but someone has to be thinking about what happens next year. I mean, without that one, talk about the definition of a blind side, right? Any questions about this particular lever? What is it? Is it coincidence, or do you as leaders see the intentionality in what the district is doing to sustain initiatives? Anyone can start some stuff. It takes a whole lot of thought power and collaboration to maintain it. Any questions about how you all do this intentionally? And could you rebuild and repair tomorrow if it wasn't what it is today? That's a big, broad, big question, but
I was
answer
in
the
another.
best you can.
I was in another district, not as superintendent. I was associate superintendent there, and the superintendent went to a conference and came back and said, "Oh, I went to this conference and I just fell in love with this reading system. So we're going to order one, this whole thing for the entire district," and just changed course like that. And I think that one thing this board does really well is not get enamored with the newest shiny penny thing. And stay the course on what we're really doing. Teachers hate that. You take 3 steps forward and then you start something new, and you take 3 steps forward and then every department's doing something different. Nothing makes sense. And so I think that we have really stayed the course and focused on what we're doing and why we're doing it, and we're not listening to the vendors, that come in and say, "Oh, this is the answer to everything. You don't want to be off. You don't want to be on." We don't do that.
So, and one thing you talk about, like the calendar, right? So we sat here, and there were people who were concerned about making that kind of a switch. And I remember one dad came and he made a pretty compelling analytical argument. He had some graphs put up and talking about minutes, and it was food for thought. But in any event, we went ahead with it. But no matter all these things we do, whether it's the facilities, whether it's an initiative like the calendar change, or you name it, there are a lot of them brought up today. At the end of the day, though, it's all to drive student learning. So we as the board have to look to Dr. Fagan to say, okay, how now we need to be able to demonstrate that these things cumulatively have moved the needle. And we need to be able to show people we moved the needle with the data that's coming out of, through the assessments. And Dr. Fagan and other people talked about that earlier. So that's one thing we need to keep the focus on, and, using data to focus, as it says there. And I think that's the important thing, is that we have to show that all of these things, they have this accumulative effect, and here's where it is. Looking at different cohorts, and talk about that individual student, as Mrs. Morrison said earlier, to show, the growth from where they were to where they are at the end of the year. And that may be lower than somebody else's, but the important thing is how they, as a student, grow. So we need to be able to show that. And at the end of the day, that's what we're about and what we need to be able to provide.
You just convicted me. I want to change a statement. I want to change this also. Maybe it's assumed, but we should be teaching sustained, effective initiatives. Because there are times where systems stick with stuff that doesn't work.
Yeah.
But I think that if there was a note that we could all write down from this particular lever, it's what you mentioned. Well, data drives and sustains initiatives. And I don't think you're a team that sticks with stuff that data doesn't support. If you see growth, it's incremental, that's data in the right direction. And if it's not growing, there's an approach or a fix. I think this should be definitely modified. Thank you for that. Thank you for that.
Thank you.
That's important when you mention it, because I want to know what the key thing is, data. And the fact that you mentioned in the very beginning, all you talk about, well, we can look at data, literacy, all this stuff. We know we're going in the right direction. That's an initiative that you want to sustain. Too often, and I say this as a learning point, and I was an employee in a system where we could not collect good data. And you're right, your good data, if it's bad, you just make worse decisions as a result of it. Mm-hmm. And we didn't know that what we were doing was ineffective because we didn't have the proof to say it. We bumped our heads, we were frustrated, but we didn't have any more conviction about staying that course than we did about changing, because we didn't know what we would change to, right? But I think that's a very important part of this. If you're going to create and sustain initiatives, what drives that is data. Is it effective, and can we show that? The other tough one, supportive workplace for staff. I've heard you talk about this. Again, they're all related, so it's hard to talk about one without mentioning components of another. But there seems to be a very good feedback system here, a very responsive leadership, accommodating. I mean, the calendar was one example. If teachers can teach together, just a lot of examples. But what other ways do you support your staff here to keep them from eating the kids? Like one superintendent said, you don't feed the teachers, they'll eat the kids. What is it that you do from the teachers all the way up to campus level leaders and make this a desirable place? What other things?
Well, one thing that I would say that I actually really liked when I moved to the area, my kids were really little, and that is the secondary schools have late arrival on Thursdays, and it allows the teachers an opportunity to collaborate and plan. And because some people think, well, teachers can do that, once every month or once, a quarter or whatever. But even as a former educator, it is so much more effective if they can do it weekly, because it's always fresh on their mind, right?
Sure, yeah.
They're doing it every single week, and it's a large chunk of time during the workday. So it's not like it's added on after a long day already, right? So I think that's something that I've always really have been impressed with the district, and that's been here for years. And I'm glad that that's one area that I believe, even with Dr. Fagan coming in, seeing how beneficial that was and making sure that we carried forth. And every once in a while, there is some pushback from families. It's not always easy, but I think it's about the outcome, right? And the outcomes have been, I think that's one of the reasons our district is what it is because those teachers have that opportunity to collaborate.
And on the same hand, going throughout the years and knowing periodically how you change things, but at the elementary level, we used to have we used to do half days, okay, which were real difficult for parents, those half days. But now, what happens is with the new calendar, that the day we get back from a holiday, the elementary days are positioned there. So the elementary just gets an extra day, but the teachers come back and have a full day to work together. So, and it's easier on parents.
Because they're
And-
smaller, right?
And they're, and, yeah, they're smaller, but it is a full day, because many times, years ago, that half day ended up, you might get 2 hours. By the time all the kids left school, and you pulled your teachers together, you might have had 2 hours. You didn't have a full half day, because there were so many other constraints that went along with it. So it makes it really nice that if you have one consistent day, that they have the full, like 7 hours, or, to make sure that they get what they need.
You still get flack for that, from.
Yeah,
No,
we'll
and
always
that's-
get flack.
Right, because, you have a lot of households today, and they've got 2 earners, and having another day, they gotta worry
But they
about
don't
that.
have as many.
Right, but even still, getting the flack, but to be able to still say, no, we're gonna support holding that course, and you'll take the bullets, because at the end of the day, again, it goes back to, is that gonna help push student learning forward? And if we really believe it, that initiative does, then we're gonna have to stand here and take, the emails, take the social media, whatever it might be, say, you're entitled to your opinion, but we still, our analysis still tells us that's what we should do. And we're sorry, we know it can be inconvenient, but
It's about the data and the outcomes. That's correct. The other thing we did, I think that really was a moment in time kind of thing, like, I'm an actions person, like, I think words are easy, I think actions are truth and harder. But when COVID started, right, and we knew what was best for students was for them, we believed what was best for them to come back, all the data showed that the kids weren't getting sick like that. So, and we knew that there were gonna be significant, problems of kids that didn't have access to meals and didn't have access to nurses and counselors and their peers, and there was just this whole long list. And frankly, we're the #1 reporters of child abuse. And so the longer the schools were closed, the longer some kids were with their abusers and not having access to other people to see that.
That is correct.
So there were so many things heavy on our hearts that we knew that the best thing for students was for us to reopen the schools. But the adults were terrified, right? Because there was no vaccines and we didn't know that much about the virus and there was all these horror stories out there. And so anyway, long story short, we literally surveyed our staff and it was a risk, right? And said, on a scale of 1 to 10, are you at 10? Which means I'm ready to come back to school tomorrow. Let's go, let's do it, whatever. And then we had the ability for people to say, I have a unique situation that I feel needs to be part of this conversation. And HR went through every single one of those and granted the teachers who had cancer or who had, immune compromised systems or, whatever it was, pregnant teachers, we didn't know what the impact was on unborn babies. So HR went through every one of those that we received back and reviewed them and interviewed people and granted people virtual positions. So again, finding a way to make it through a very difficult situation without just shutting the whole thing down and saying, well, we can't ask people with, who are going through cancer treatment to come back to work, so none of us can go back to work, even though that's horrible for students, which is what systems all over the country did. Instead, we literally went staff member by staff member and figured it out. And we had enough we had enough kids on virtual that the virtual teachers could do that.
Yep.
We had enough kids in person that the in-person teachers could do that. And it worked great. I mean, it really did. And people felt empowered to be part of that conversation and that the district actually cared, But frankly, all of our parents who were getting up and going to work were not very sympathetic to the idea that we were just going to stay home, And I agreed with them, And so I feel like, a lot of districts across the country stayed closed for a very long time, and it was an easy thing to do. It was not good for students, it was not good for families, and it really put them at a huge disadvantage in learning. So I felt like we really found the middle ground on that, and that pays dividends going forward because employees think in the back of their mind, they watch what happens over there, and they say, but in Humble, the teachers who were medically not capable of taking that risk didn't have to. We didn't fire them. We didn't say, well, if you can't come to work, you know, put you on leave. You know, we made it all work. And then there was a day that came where we said, there's vaccines available for everyone. You know, this is getting to an endemic stage. You know, it's time to come back to work. And everybody came back.
And when I hear that, the things that pop out are actions that are consistent with your vision. And part of your vision, if it's comprehensive, includes, and I think, I forget who mentioned empathy? Someone threw the word out, empathy.
Kim? Mr.
Yeah,
Kirchhoffer?
you did. Yeah, it was over here, yeah. And that's important, right? Because if you're going to build a system that's comprehensive, I understand the pendulum swings sometimes where this is an emphasis, data matters, and it's going to be hard, though. You're going to give out some evaluations, and someone might not be here. But the underlying thing, we can do that because we've practiced and built empathy into our system. Anyway, back to the point. I hear a decision made with a lot of thought, a lot of data, and alignment with your vision. And this is hard for some leaders. Once you've gone through that process and you make a decision, I say this very carefully because I like my job and I want to keep doing it, you almost can't do anything more. And you almost can't afford to be swayed to make a different decision, right, that would appease but not be the best decision. Doesn't mean that you're perfect and that anything you do is infallible. It just means that you went through a process as leaders and you've decided on a course of action. You have done your job as trustees and an executive leader of the district. I mean, you've done your job, right? That's the assurance that you can have in putting your head on the pillow. Might not sleep perfectly easy because your passion and your concern and care for the whole community keeps you always wondering, what can we do next? How can we be better? But it's hard to ask for more as a leadership team, right? And so when I hear that approach, I'm thinking, well, shoot, yeah, that sounds like a supportive place for staff. I mean, and you couldn't ask for more. And so when I think about what the board has to kind of take away from this, one thing, if we're very pragmatic, we say, wow, that process that we went through, and I'm saying this from my own perspective, I didn't hear that level of work, because it's a lot of work. What you did is a lot of work. I didn't hear that level of commitment to understanding every teacher's unique situation and then providing each person, as we can, something that accommodates the situation. Because it's too much work, a lot of work, more time than people want to give. But when I heard that, I'm thinking, wow, there's one takeaway. This team can practically say, we'll take that approach to be thorough and fully understanding our teacher's situation and base decisions on that. And we'll be able to say to the community, we've made the effort to fully understand everyone's situation, and we've made decisions based on that. I mean, that's the justification, the rationale that leaders have to be able to provide, and it sounds like it was done really well. Not just during COVID time, for example, but I'm guessing that's the mode that kind of drives everything else you do, whether it's a 1 week off per month or different teaching styles and options. Again, so I want to applaud you for that. If we look at some of the highlights they observed from those moving districts, again, I bet you'll see the same things that you've mentioned. Individuals' work and results, staff feels confident that they can succeed. I know Ms. Morrison mentioned about how, I think Mr. Scarfield said, the data comes back to us. We can see the data and we know if we're going to shift or not. Organizing the small groups, the different things that you all do with your teams, right? Collective time for study, having the teachers have that later arrival second day for the students, the teachers can collaborate and meet. There's so many different ways. I mean, there's no reason, there's no question why teachers are flocking over here. But again, you can kind of get an idea of what that looks like. But as a board, and superintendent team, of course, but as a board especially, think about the processes that your management has put in place to create supportive workplaces. And then the big question I ask is there anything that, and I guess Dr. Fagan can answer this, anything that the board can do more of to support this? Or do you say, we're doing good right now, another response, they'll let me know if there's anything.
You can answer this one, he said.
Are they doing a great job so far? Anything they can do at this moment to support? Or you'll let them know when something comes up?
No, they are doing a good job, and it's difficult because, yes, you do the right things and you make the right decisions, but you still get the 500 emails that say, that wasn't the right decision. And most of it's just based in misinformation and misunderstanding. But, every single time it's been a tough call, they backed the right decision, whether it was Harvey or whether it was COVID, virtual learning to continue or not. We gave a significant increase to our teachers this year. It was the right thing to do. So every single time, this board operates with courage, and they do the right thing, and that's why it continues forward. They don't acquiesce to the 10%, and there's just too many boards that, oh, well, that won't be popular with everyone, the loud everyone, and so, we're not gonna do that. And this board's like, nope, that's what we're gonna do, and we're gonna explain our position, and we're gonna move it forward. And so, it's been good.
Mr. Holmes, you've run companies, you've run groups, led groups.
Yes, sir.
What did those groups do well in terms of creating a supportive workplace that you also see being done well here in the district?
I think it's the distributed leadership, hiring a person, not micromanaging, but holding them accountable, and there's mutual accountability, right? So I always like facilitating environments where it's shared accountability, and I welcome, and I almost challenge them to let me know when I'm wrong. If I'm going down the wrong way, and I've negotiated an employee where the end result is that stock price, they get, that end of the year bonus, and it's based on our stock price, and I'm going the wrong way and you don't tell me, and I've hired you. So I always hire people that are smarter than me. And again, I try to be a level 10 leader. You hire people that are smarter than you, but I also try to hire people that'll push back. And so that's what I see. I do see a culture overall where I haven't seen it, but I can kind of tell that the people on Liz's team will push back. Respectfully, right? That's what it's, just respectfully. Hey, I disagree. This is what I think we should do. And she still has to ultimately make that decision sometimes, but it's shared accountability, and that's what this board is. And at the end of the day, the end result in corporate America is a better stock price. Here at this district is a better student. That's all that matters.
Like you said, a better student, not so much a score only or this, but
Okay, yeah, it scores,
better
I'm right
students
there
take
with,
care of everything else.
I need an overall better district, and that's what these kids are getting, just a really great experience to have access to so many different things, because again, not every student is white collar, blue collar. Some are gonna be entrepreneurs and start their own company right out of high school or right in high school. And that's what I'm gonna tell you. So I always, and I love this. And I love the story. We don't have to do it here. She's got to tell it to you another time. But the whole barbershop idea, hearing kids cutting hair in the bathrooms of, what was it, Humble High School?
Humble High School.
They're getting in trouble, but kids are paying them to cut their hair, and they're cutting hair in the bathroom before school. And you create a solution from that. That's huge. Now we got a barber school. So these kids are learning, let's get you certified, right? Not in trouble anymore, and we created a solution to a problem. That's what a district
Shutting down
does.
and giving out discipline referrals.
Yeah.
Much better outcome.
Saw a need, create a solution.
So you mentioned the idea of shared accountability. I love it because I'm going to share quickly this example. I hear a lot of folks, I've heard systems talk about incentives, and they fail. Because at the end of the day, people may say they want more money, but there are other problems that really do keep them from performing.
Sure.
You give them money, performance peaks, but then it goes back down. The support wasn't there, the motivation, the passion, the deep connection. None of that was there, so it was never fully about the money.
That's right.
But what I've seen that works in terms of incentives was this shared incentive. Like, I forgot where it was, but we're gonna all succeed. We'll all get bonuses if third grade students hit the target. That means everyone who sweeps a floor in that third grade, on the elementary campus, every paraprofessional. I thought that was interesting. We're gonna all get, not just a teacher whose classroom doesn't, we're all gonna get bonuses. And then this district saw that success more frequently. I thought that was interesting because I'd only heard incentives don't work. In business school, we learned that there's a peak but then ultimately, there are job satisfaction components that aren't money related that cause the performance to go back down to where it was. Figure out what those motivation points are and then address those. So I love that idea of shared accountability. Who's the newest board member? That's what I thought. Okay. I'm going to pick on you again.
Okay. Okay.
We're going to talk about 5 more minutes. I'm going to let you go home and get back to your other life. If you don't mind, Mr. Holmes, will you pick one, the last one to discuss on the list? We just finished number 4. If you want to take a moment to look at those conditions and pick the last one we're going to discuss, I'd appreciate that.
5, 6, or 7.
And then I want to end on the barbershop story that you referred to.
Okay, so pick 5, 6, or 7 to.
Yes, sir.
You know what? I'm gonna do number 6.
Okay.
You want me to read it, or you want me to touch on it?
Let's just start talking about it.
Okay. So-
Anyone who has seen it, yeah, go ahead. You can kick it off.
Well, I'm going to take this support for school sites through data and information. I think we've hammered home that Dr. Fagan and her team, you can look at data and make it what you want, right? Good or bad. But I'm going to touch on the pandemic. And the reason why I was chuckling while y'all were talking about the pandemic is I'm an engineer by trade, but during the pandemic, I got a little emotional, and I went outside of data to make a decision. So I'm chuckling, Dr. Fagan, because I was lighting up Schultz. I was lighting her up, why are you doing this? This is before I got on the board, right? So I was lighting her up. I mean, sending emails. I'm like, why are you doing this? We need to stay home. You're putting the kids at risk. And it wasn't until I saw one of the board meetings and you were talking about data. Strip out all the emotion, data. And then I called one of my friends who's a social worker in the North Carolina school system. I think I told you about this when we met for lunch initially. And he said, Marcus, what Dr. Fagan is saying, because I was mad still. I was, like they say now, I was mad. All right, I was mad. And he said, Marcus, I want you to think about this. I have had an exponential increase in domestic violence because these kids are at home with parents who sometimes are now out of a job and they don't have access to lunch, and just all of that ecosystem that a school system provides. Mm-hmm. And from then on, I was a huge fan. I was already a fan, but then I was like, data. Yeah. And so she went complete, and I know y'all were getting lit up the board at that time. I know y'all were getting lit up constantly.
Because we were first. We were the first district to reopen.
That's it. And I'm talking about CNN, worldwide. I had friends in Germany. Man, Marcus, you on ISD, right? I mean, I'm getting friends in Germany that are watching CNN International, right? They made the right decision based on the data because it was the right thing for the students. That right there, it sealed it for me. That's it, data. Yeah, that's what influenced our decision. Take out the emotion.
It was huge, and I'm going to tag a little bit on that, because understanding the balance and knowing, I admired our leadership during that time.
I did.
Because what Dr. Fagan and her team did, they took the data from our specific area, and we're talking zip
That's right.
codes.
You sure did.
Yeah, we did.
Zip
I remember.
codes to make sure, okay, this is our data. It's not the state's data, it's our data.
It's not the county's
Not the
data.
county data.
Not the.
Our data.
Our data, where our kids live.
That's right.
And she looked at they looked at numbers, they looked at everything, and the
And that was
data
the CEOs of
said,
the hospitals,
you
too.
need.
In
Very-
our
They
zip code, our
connected,
hospitals.
they connected with every, and so you take that data and you look at it and say, we need to be open.
Yeah.
There is no reason why
That's
we
right.
should be shut.
That's right.
We can provide the safety measures to make sure these kids are as safe as they possibly can be, but they can be getting instruction.
Well, we always had the virtual option. So
Mhm.
back
We
to the
always had the virtual
customization,
option.
personalization is,
Makes sense, yeah.
if your family is too fragile, you can choose the virtual option.
Yeah.
And it wasn't where it needed to be, but you can't take an entire staff, throw them into virtual on March 6th of 2020 and say, go get them. I mean, it's just not a recipe for success, but some teachers did thrive. And as more people came back to in-person, we were able to shift kids over to the best virtual teachers. And so we got, we were better and better and better as we went, but, so we would always be able to say, there's always the virtual option. But they're right, we did very hyper-local data research. And we had decision trees that were like this. Under what circumstances would we close the district? And the answer was, if our hospitals called us and said, we're overwhelmed, turning away critical patients, and we can't have one more, then we would be part of the solution, right? But our hospitals never said that to us. They never needed that. So we had a decision tree, and we knew what the cut points were, and then they evolved over time. And we got a little pushback on that, but we said, look, we know more now than we did a year ago. Why wouldn't we update our metrics? I mean, that would be dumb, right? So, anyway.
Or even graduation.
Yeah, even graduation.
We were told
yeah.
essentially we couldn't have graduation. We did have graduation anyway.
I remember y'all would get it into, yeah.
And, and there were parents like Mr. Holmes,
I'm
Emailing
hoping
us.
Lucy
You're
still
gonna
likes me.
kill us all.
I was like, I hope Lucy
Yes.
likes me now.
but what I would say, even if you look at those numbers from the community and the parents,
Madman.
I don't know the exact number, but almost every single student came to graduation.
Oh, yeah.
Oh,
It was
yes.
huge.
I don't even, some schools, I think everyone came, but
But we did it outside, and we did all the stuff,
We separated them.
Well, and we were
We didn't
beautiful.
touch them.
We were basing it on science too. We're saying, okay, UV light and fresh air are huge positive factors. And so let's, facts over fear. And that was the whole thing the whole time.
That's right.
So about 2 seconds before you said decision tree, I was gonna ask, what's wrong with using decision trees? I mean, some good solid approaches to making decisions. Look at the probability, right? Take the best outcome.
That's right.
And the question is, why can't a board, I don't care if they're quote unquote lay people, as in they're not educators, who's to say they can't grow and learn and develop their approach to be technical, to be strategic, to be smart? I mean, that is exactly what you're supposed to do, because again, I'm gonna emphasize this before we close, if no one else in the system is taking that approach, it won't happen, right? And now I'm gonna refer to Davis Campbell, Michael Fullen. And they got pretty firm and strict with it. They said, too often we see boards in their research that take the reins of the administrative component because that's easy. It doesn't require a whole lot of deep learning. Doesn't require a lot of stretching. They can understand that component, they can talk about it, and it's easy to micromanage. But the hard work is being strategic, making database decisions, not on emotions or anything else, but making those database decisions and then thinking about tomorrow or the next year. That's the hard stuff. No one has a crystal ball. They don't know if their decisions are gonna flop or be a success. But that's the risk you take when you wear the label trustee, right? You were elected to make those hard decisions, not to do what's safe and just to kind of get by, right? And so if no one else is doing that, who's gonna do it? And so I want to just applaud you, because when I hear you talk about your system, I see a commitment to doing the hard work to collect data. A lot of boards hear database decisions and they think we need more assessments. No, data for everything.
That's right.
You make big decisions about money, hiring, firing, expanding, growth, taking the community's money, right? Asking them to fund things, I'll put it that way. Yeah, data for everything. And I just heard your approach to understanding, well, what's important to us? If we preach local control, take advantage of it. What's important to your community? How do the numbers look in your community? What are the data saying about your community? If it's saying one thing, don't do what the district in the Panhandle is doing, right? And so I love that approach that I'm hearing. And the more I listen, I think it's going to be like, duh, Orrin, the key to success is just flat out hard work and commitment. Because I'm hearing you do things that other folks don't make the time or don't think they have the capacity to do. but you've done it and you've reaped the benefits. Well, what did our comp district do? They closed, we're going to close. Whoa. Let's look at who we are.
Fear.
And base data on this. Well, they're growing fast. What did they do when they were growing fast? They did this. Well, no, let's understand how growth looks for us. By zip code, I heard that. I loved it. It's impressive, right? So I'm going to end on that note. The question is, two questions. One, is there anything that the board, and this is kind of rhetorical, can learn or do to, I guess that was, did I get out of order? No, that was it. It just phrased differently. No, it is out of order. No, it was data, yeah. Support for school sites through data information. What can the board do? And I think you're nailing it, right? You care about data. You have processes to collect data. So here's what I'm going to do, a challenge for the board. Maybe in the next 2 years, consider this. To preserve what you have, what you've worked so hard for, when you think about onboarding new trustees or even educating the community or just your own kind of North Star to recenter, think about framing your orientation of new board members in this context. If these things matter, and the research showed that when boards understand the degree to which these levers exist in their system, and the presence of these makes a big difference, think about then how you teach board members about how these look in your system. And maybe that's a part of the orientation. Say, hey, we're committed to a shared leadership model. Here's how it looks in the system. In other words, you're teaching the next generation how to preserve what you've built. And it can be very thoughtful work, it can be ongoing and involved, and it won't be done in one setting. But think about what it means to preserve these things in your system. And on that note, I'll open up for any final questions or comments from you. And if you don't have any, I'm going to let you go home and get back to your life, because I know you have a whole lot of stuff to do. The district ain't running itself, and neither is your personal life. So that's all I have for you today.
Well, thank you very much.
My pleasure. Thank y'all.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, the time is now 12:23 p.m. This meeting is now adjourned.